Howdy doody everybody, and welcome to the Texas edition of America's Haunted Places. Folks, here in Texas, you know you've got some very old structures and loads of history, and this means you've got a ton of ghosts, like more ghosts than any state I've covered before. That means only good things for you, as I've got at the very least one 2-hour video about ghosts in your state, and this may very well be the longest video I've ever produced. Now, before we get started, a quick reminder, I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers in 2025, and therefore if you like what you see, it would mean the world to me if you liked this video, subscribed, and commented your favorite haunted place in Texas down below. It'll never cost you a dime, and it's an easy way to say, hey YouTube, this guy's alright. Anyways, with that, this video should be well over 2 hours, so sit back, relax, and enjoy a cool beverage as I tell you some spooky tales about your state. Right now, I have a list of at least 30 of the most haunted places in Texas before me, but before I even started scripting this video, I knew the first entry had to be the Alamo. As a Tennessean, the Alamo isn't just an important historic site, it's a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Growing up in Tennessee, I heard countless stories about the Tennessee volunteers who fought and passed to the other side here along brave Texas rebels. And according to legend, some of these individuals never really left. This battle was a pivotal moment in history, and for many, it remains deeply personal. It's also the final resting place of legendary figures like Davy Crockett. Anyways, this is the story of the Alamo. The Alamo was built initially as a mission, and being a mission, its original purpose was to educate the indigenous people in the late 1700s, which also meant converting them to Christianity. This mission was constructed as part of Spain's effort to convert the local people to Christianity, which was a small part of their broader mission to establish a foothold in Middle America. By the 1800s, the purpose of this place would vary, though, becoming repurposed as a military garrison, including revolutionaries and rebels like Sabo, Dragon, and Bartholomew Kuma. Its modern name, the Alamo, would actually come from some of the Spanish soldiers stationed here, referring to it lovingly after their hometown, Alondra de la Parra, that is in present-day Mexico. Thus, because of this, in the 1830s, it had been transformed into a fortress, complete with high walls and numerous buildings. Now, among these struggles that occurred here, one of course stands out as the most historically significant, and that is the so-called Battle of the Alamo that occurred in 1836. This battle was against the forces of then-dictator General Santa Anna. Santa Anna, as you see, had recently declared himself the absolute ruler of Mexico, and following this, Texas did what Texans do and declared themselves independent of Mexico. Santa Anna, of course, would view this as an act of treason and a challenge to his authority, and decisively decided to march an army into Texas and wipe out this resistance. San Antonio, the home to the Alamo, was a strategic target and a key city in Texas, and it was occupied by about 145 revolutionaries, a number which would increase to 189 before the battle began. Santa Anna, I'm sure, thought that laying siege to the Alamo and swiftly taking it back would be an easy task, which would demoralize the rebels and set the scene for him to take back his land. But as we know today, this task wouldn't be so simple. Santa Anna would arrive on February 23rd of 1836 with about 1,000 troops, which they would later fortify to 4,000 troops. But led by William Travis and Jim Bowie, the rebels and volunteer armies would take the lives of 1,600 Mexican soldiers, an enormous cost to the Mexican army, before the Mexican army would successfully take the Alamo, ultimately deciding to execute every last one of the Texas defenders, sparing only a few non-combatants to spread the word of the fate that awaited anyone who would dare defy General Santa Anna. While this act, the execution, was something General Santa Anna would use to scare off those who would oppose him, it would actually end up being a rallying cry for Texas resistance members who would yell out, "Remember the Alamo," fueling the fires of the resistance and ultimately motivating Santa Anna's defeat at the later Battle of San Jacinto. Now, breaking away from the history though, as mentioned, nearly 2,000 passed away in this struggle at the Alamo, many of whom were buried on site, and even before this location was the Alamo, much of this plot of land served as a cemetery between 1724 and 1793, during which time it's estimated nearly 1,000 people were buried here. In short, there's a lot of folks buried here, and therefore a ton of potential for a ghost to be on site. And it seems this potential is being fully utilized, as if you believe the story, there's a ton of strange things and people of old who are frequently seen on the premises. Now, as these stories go, the first spectral sightings occurred mere weeks after the battle, in an episode that is frankly pure cinema. This episode recounts that after Santa Anna's capture during the Battle of San Jacinto by Sam Houston and the Texican freedom fighters in April of 1836, he would retaliate by sending orders to the 1,000 men he left behind in San Antonio to destroy the Alamo, and they would intend to follow these orders. They would light some torches and start approaching the church, and suddenly, out of nowhere, 6 apparitions would appear in front of the church doors, wielding, get this, flaming swords before demanding, "Do not touch the Alamo, do not touch these walls." This vision would horrify the Mexican soldiers, who would flee and refuse to return. Any threats by superiors after this apparently would be scoffed at, as nobody would get close to the Alamo. Nobody quite agrees on whether these were the Texas defenders or monks of old, but regardless, something was defending the Alamo this day. Now, I should note, there would be subsequent efforts to destroy the Alamo, but these efforts, too, would be met with resistance from those apparently perished individuals. For instance, one report recounts when a Mexican general assembled a second group to torch the Longhouse barracks, only for them to be repelled by a towering, ghostly figure holding 2 fireballs in the palms of their hands, standing on the building's roof. Fearing supernatural wrath, the troops abandoned the mission again, and after this, for the next decade, the Alamo lay in eerie ruin, but it would not be destroyed, and by 1846, following Texas's annexation into the U.S., the Army restored the Alamo for use as a military outpost. It was during this time, up until the late 19th century, during which the remains of the Alamo were used for military purposes, and later as a jail, that much of the Alamo's haunted reputation would be established, when inmates and soldiers alike reported time and time again to see ghostly sentries pacing the roof of the Alamo grounds. There are even written accounts of old inmates who, while peering through their cell windows, could see shadowy figures standing guard and pacing around the Alamo, as if they were still keeping the old mission safe from Mexican forces. Even old newspapers reported on these supposed sightings, often mentioning the eerie fact that the guards at the jail, often military veterans themselves who shouldn't have been scared of much, were scared to patrol the Alamo at night. Now, regardless of what you believe, these ghost stories about the Alamo persist to this day, and I'll share with you here every supposed haunting that I could find about the Alamo. To start, there are many reports of the Mexican soldiers of old wandering the premises and recreating their historical acts in various ways. Perhaps the most famous of these soldiers is General Manuel Fernandez de Castrillon. Castrillon was a Spanish officer who was part of the Mexican army at the time of the siege on the Alamo, and it's worth noting that his role was unique in large part because he opposed the assault, though when given the order to carry it out, he did so without question. That being said, when the fight was won, it was well established that Castrillon pled for mercy to be given to the 7 Texan soldiers who survived the Alamo siege, an attempt to be honorable, but his pleas were of course ignored, as we're well aware, and the Mexican forces would instead slaughter the remaining soldiers. General Castrillon didn't pass away this day, of course, but would end up losing his life later at the Battle of San Jacinto, in a show of courage when, in the face of a losing battle, instead of running, he would face his attackers, apparently saying in Spanish, "I've been in 40 battles and never showed my back. I am too old to show it now," before being riddled with bullets. Nowadays, it's said in the afterlife, the Honorable General Castrillon has opted not to spend his eternity where he fell, but rather back in the Alamo, where he is pacing the hallways of the campus with his hands clasped behind his back and his head facing the ground while shaking his head. Clearly, it seems in the afterlife, General Castrillon is ashamed of the actions taken by his compatriots, and now, for all eternity, he dwells on those final moments at the Alamo. Beyond this, the old Mexican forces show themselves in the form of spectral sounds. In particular, modern guests have reported to hear the haunting notes of El Degüello, the no mercy trumpet call played by Santa Anna's troop during the final assault, often reporting that after hearing it, the sounds of screams, wailing, and sometimes even cannon fire can be heard echoing throughout the night, as if the fight for the Alamo was occurring right in front of them all over again. There are also many sightings of individuals that folks speculate may be the ghost of the Texas forces. For instance, one frequently spotted specter is a cowboy in a black duster and a hat, soaked as if caught in a downpour. This ghost is often seen in the gardens of the Alamo, and historians speculate that he might be one of the dispatch riders that William Travis sent for reinforcements. There was also an often reported sight of a man who occasionally will stick his upper body out of the windows in front of the church, and he'll look around the area before leaning back into the church and disappearing from sight. Perhaps most famous among the rebel forces, however, is of course a man wearing a coonskin cap and his classic tried-and-true buckskin outfit, the Alamo defender and my fellow Tennessean, Davy Crockett. Old Davy Crockett is seen all over the Alamo with his rifle in hand. From what I can tell, he doesn't really do anything notable, but he wanders the grounds. Also, if you don't know, Crockett is a folklore figure in and of himself. Hailing from Tennessee, he was a frontiersman, soldier, and politician, famous for his legendary exploits on the American frontier, such as killing hundreds of bears and riding alligators, and he became a symbol of rugged individualism and bravery, dying heroically while defending the Alamo during the Texas Revolution in 1836. And if we're talking about famous rebels that perished at the Alamo, James Bowie too deserves a mention. James was a frontiersman as well, and if you've heard of the famous Bowie knife, you've heard of James. He was pivotal in its creation. James, too, would die at the Alamo, and was a leader in this struggle. Also, it's worth noting, James was a certified badass. He had typhoid during the struggle, and he was so sick he couldn't even lift himself from the bed. But little did those dastardly Mexican soldiers know he was gonna work from home. I kid you not, in an act that would have made every remote employee shed a dang tear, Bowie fought the Mexican forces from his bed. If you believe the legend, racking up quite the body count while he was at it. But sadly, he was finally put down because, he wasn't able to dodge or anything because he was in his bed firing away. Anyways, when you pass away like this, you know you're coming back from beyond the grave, and it's said that Bowie still haunts the room where he was put down. Here it's said from time to time, Bowie will respond to prompts asked by ghost hunters, and if you use one of those god-awful voice boxes that irritatingly switches between radio channels, you're liable to hear not only the word Bowie, but the sound of a knife being sharpened over the radio. Also common in this room is the apparition of a shadowy person. In particular, this shadow person is said to wield a knife in his left hand, and many think this is all too coincidental given Bowie was left-handed himself. Now, moving away from combatants at the struggle at the Alamo, there's also a supposed ghost of a young man with blonde hair that's often seen in the Alamo, usually wandering the gift shop after hours. I kid you not. I read about this young boy not on some ghost forum or via a tip on Reddit, but I heard about it in a Yelp review. That's right, a friggin' Yelp review dinged the Alamo gift shop a star because they thought they saw a ghost. Yep, truth is stranger than fiction. Regardless, this young boy is usually seen by staff and security after hours, when nobody should be in the gift shop. And there's no consistent story as to who this young boy was, but the prevailing opinion is, based on the young boy's old-looking clothing, that he was actually living at or near the Alamo at the time of the famous battle. Some say that hopefully he was evacuated before it, but despite surviving the battle, some say that his parents may have perished on site, and because of this, he returns to the Alamo, where he last saw them, looking for them. If you're looking for this young boy, your best chance to see him is the month of February. The closer to the anniversary of the Battle of the Alamo on February 23rd, the better. So in conclusion, the Alamo stands as a place of deep historical significance, but it also seems to be a hotspot for some, let's say, otherworldly activity. Whether you're a true believer in ghosts or not, there's no denying that these stories and spectral sightings around the Alamo are just as rich as the history itself. From the vengeful spirits of Mexican soldiers to the lingering presence of Texas heroes like Davy Crockett and James Bowie, the Alamo is a place where the past and maybe the afterlife never quite left. So if you ever find yourselves walking the grounds, maybe give a little wave to the old cowboy in the black duster, or ask if Davy Crockett's got any tips on bear hunting. And remember, when in doubt, always steer clear of those ominous knife-sharpening ghost noises, for your own safety. And if we're talking about the Alamo, we've got to move on to the Menger Hotel next, as this hotel actually rests on the land in which the Alamo fell to General Santa Anna, sitting right next to the Alamo's campus in modern day. Thus, this hotel is said to be haunted by many of those same individuals we just discussed. who still linger at the Alamo, and it even has a few ghosts that it keeps all to itself too. Now, this hotel was constructed by one William A. Menger, a German brewmaster who moved to San Antonio in the 1840s. Initially, William would open up a brewery named Western Brewery, alongside a fellow brewmaster from Germany. Fun fact, this brewery is the oldest brewery in Texas, and at one point it was also the largest brewery in Texas, and this brewery sat partially on the site where the Battle of the Alamo occurred too. Now here's the other side of this coin. While William operated this brewery, he would, for 3 years, be lodged in a nearby boarding house that was owned and run by a widow named Mary Gunther. My impression is that William and Mary became very good friends, or maybe a little bit more because just a few years after meeting, Menger would actually convince her to marry him, and they would jointly engage in these businesses. Over time, this boarding house that they ran would become increasingly occupied as San Antonio had changed a bit since the 1840s, when Menger moved to town. Texas had gained statehood and attracted settlers from Mexico, as well as a large population of German immigrants. In addition to this population growth, its economy had also changed, going beyond ranching and farming and attracting more brewers, merchants, and craftsmen. There was also a steady U.S. military presence because San Antonio was relatively vulnerable to attacks from Native Americans. In short, you get the picture. San Antonio had grown, and the boarding house the couple ran needed to grow with it. Thus, Mr. and Mrs. Menger decided to turn their boarding house into a bona fide hotel. Thus, the two would hire an architect, John M. Fries, and by February of 1859, the hotel would open a 2-story structure as opulent inside as it was outside, with a basement that would actually house the beer he sold in his brewery, a tunnel running between this spot and the Western Brewery. Also, of course, they named it after themselves, making it the Menger Hotel. Ultimately, over time, they would rapidly expand this hotel to have 90 rooms, and it would, at least at the time, be the largest hotel in San Antonio. But then came the Civil War. Obviously, during this struggle, business would slow, and like many places of lodging, it would be converted to a makeshift hospital for the sick and wounded, many of whom would die on the premises. In March of 1871, this list of individuals who died on the premises would actually grow to include William Menger himself too, by a cause that even today remains unclear. All that's new is he grew ill, but what he grew ill from was never revealed. Now, after William's death, admittedly not much changed with the establishment. The brewery and hotel ran as usual, and the establishment even kept pace with the technology of the era, getting gas, for instance, in the 1870s. But by the 1880s, perhaps because Mary was getting old herself and her son had no interest in inheriting the hotel, it was sold for about the modern-day equivalent of $3 million. And thus, under this new ownership, it would receive many of the updates that turned it into the luxurious hotel it is today. At this point, the history associated with the Menger becomes significantly less bloody. There was a fire, sure, but nobody passed away in it, and there was actually, for some reason, an alligator that lived in the Menger's atrium for a while, and from the late 1800s through the 1900s, there were substantial updates and some really famous guests, ranging from Babe Ruth to Ulysses S. Grant to Robert A. Lee to Teddy Roosevelt, and ultimately, in the 1980s, the hotel was awarded a state historical marker. That said, it was around this time that this hotel started to look a bit dated, that individuals started reporting strange things were occurring here. And now comes the fun part of my job, telling you about the ghosts of the Menger Hotel. To start, as I mentioned, Teddy Roosevelt himself visited the Menger Hotel multiple times, and his most famous visit is perhaps in 1898 when he would actually start recruiting out of the hotel patio for his so-called Rough Riders, or the USA's volunteer cavalry, that was formed to fight in the Spanish-American War, a unit made up of a diverse hodgepodge of cowboys, ranchers, Ivy League athletes, miners, and lawyers. Roosevelt would recruit here for a month during this episode, and after the Spanish-American War would even return with some other surviving Rough Riders for a reunion in 1905, and some say he loved it so much when he visited that he still comes back today. Therefore now, over 100 years after this, individuals that frequent the bar of the Menger Hotel claim to see or occasionally hear a man moving around and chatting jovially. When seen, he's almost always translucent, hardly moving, and apparently totally fixated on something. Other times, he's been known to yell at workers at the bar and even try to hold a conversation with them. In some of these episodes, the workers don't actually know who they're talking to. That is until old Teddy starts trying to convince them that they should join the Rough Riders. In short, Teddy is usually polite, if a bit inviting even, and despite scaring new employees from time to time, he's apparently the most frequently seen ghost in the whole hotel. The most recent sighting of Teddy that I could find actually took place in 2021. So hey, who knows, maybe he's still kicking around, and perhaps you can see him for yourself. There's also the ghost of one Sally White, a woman who was a staff member at the Menger in the 1800s. Sally White worked as a chambermaid, and she was known for her kind demeanor and dedication to the job. But while she was a happy camper at work, her home life was anything but happy. Her common-law husband, Harry Wheeler, was the jealous type, the kind of man who saw threats where there were none. Rumors spread around the hotel that Wheeler was always looking over Sally's shoulder, furious at any attention she received. And in 1876, his jealousy turned deadly. One night in late March, Sally and Harry had one of their usual explosive arguments, but this time it escalated to something much worse. Wheeler threatened to off her, and Sally, terrified, ran straight to the police. They let her stay the night at the courthouse, but when they searched her home, they found no weapons, meaning they had no legal reason to arrest Harry. By the next morning, Sally had no choice but to return home and grab a few things before heading to work. This time, he was ready to do something bad. She bolted out of the house, sprinting towards the Menger Hotel just 2 blocks away, desperate for safety. But Harry was fast. He caught up, he grabbed her, and he pulled the trigger. He got her once in the abdomen, and when she managed to wriggle free, he got her again near the spine. Sally held on for 2 days before passing away on the 3rd floor of the original section of the Menger Hotel. And as for Harry Wheeler, he was never arrested, never tried, never punished. He just disappeared. But Sally, despite passing away, she never really left. Today, over a century later, guests and staff alike report seeing a spectral chambermaid still going about her duties. Most often, she's seen on the 3rd floor, her arms full of towels and sheets as if she's tending to the rooms. Some say she walks through walls like they aren't even there, and at least one unfortunate guest stepped out of the shower only to find Sally calmly folding sheets at the foot of their bed. That particular guest wasted no time sprinting downstairs to tell the concierge exactly what she saw. Hopefully she put on clothes before she did this, but hey, if not, I couldn't really blame her. If you're hoping to meet Sally yourself, your best bet is to book a room on the 3rd floor of the original section. Keep an eye out for a nearly translucent woman in a maid's uniform, a scarf tied around her head, and a string of beads around her neck. The translucent part, I hope, should be a dead giveaway that it's Sally. And if you really want to test your luck, mess up your sheets before heading to bed. You just might wake up and find them neatly folded, courtesy of the Menger Hotel's most dedicated employee, even in the afterlife. Also, supposedly haunting the Menger Hotel is one Captain Richard King, a businessman, cattle baron, and a steamboat magnate of the 1800s, who apparently isn't some pushover that's going to let death stop him from living a life of luxury in the Menger Hotel. Originally, King was from New York City, and his early life was far from luxurious. He was born to a poor Irish family, and was sold into indentured servitude as a child, only to escape and find his way to the South by ferry. This daring streak would define his life. King went on to found a successful steamboat company, even working as a blockade runner during the Civil War. Now, despite all of these already interesting accolades, you've probably heard of his biggest claim to fame, King Ranch, his sprawling Texas empire that would eventually cover 1 million acres. As owner of King Ranch, King often traveled to San Antonio for business, and on those trips he developed a deep appreciation for the Menger Hotel. In fact, he stayed here so often that the hotel gave him his own private suite on the 2nd floor. So when stomach cancer caught up with him in 1885, King insisted on returning to the Menger Hotel for his final days, ultimately dying in his suite, and his funeral was held right downstairs in the hotel lobby, eliciting one of the largest processions San Antonio had ever seen. But Captain King wasn't about to let death keep him from his favorite spot, as I said. To this day, guests report strange encounters in his old room, now called the King Ranch Suite. Here, many wake in the middle of the night to see King's ghost standing at the foot of their bed, quietly watching. Others have heard the heavy sound of boots pacing the room, shutters opening and closing on their own, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. And then there's the mysterious red orb seen only inside or just outside of King's suite. No one knows exactly what it means, but if you've ever seen it, you might just be closer to Captain King than you'd like. So if you ever stay at the Menger Hotel and hear slow, deliberate footsteps outside your door or catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the halls, don't be too surprised. Some guests check out of the Menger Hotel, but it seems Captain King never did. Finally, let's circle back to where we started, the Alamo. The Menger Hotel, which sits on the same land that the Battle of the Alamo occurred, of course, has seen a whole lot of death from that conflict too. And thus, while you stay here, it's said that if you look out your window towards the Alamo, you're liable to see everything from the ghostly defenders of the Alamo on the roof roof of the church to the ghost of the man in a coonskin hat pacing the premises. Also, if you're unlucky, you might even be woken up by the sounds of charging soldiers. I saw this one a couple of times in my research. So if you ever find yourself checking into the Menger Hotel, be prepared. You might not be sleeping alone. Between the ghosts of the Alamo and more specific ghosts, such as Teddy Roosevelt's recruiting antics, Sally White's ghostly housekeeping, and Captain King's restless spirit, this historic landmark is packed with more than just legends. It's teeming with lingering presences. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the Menger Hotel's long history and eerie encounters make it one of the most haunted hotels in America. And who knows, maybe if you order a drink at the bar, Teddy himself will try to enlist you. If you've been to this place and have a story to tell, seriously, I implore you to leave it in a comment down below. If you ever looked into haunted places in Texas, you've probably heard of Goatman's Bridge. Except, let's be clear, this is no longer Goatman's Bridge. It is now legally recognized as the property of Shane Madej. I don't make the rules, I just acknowledge them. Regardless, as far as I'm aware, Shane allows the legend to be told, so we'll get into it anyways. This bridge, officially known as the Old Alton Bridge, was built in 1884 as a way to connect Denton to Copper Canyon. But over the years, it's become better known for terrifying encounters, ghostly apparitions, and the occasional person regretting their life choices after knocking 3 times at midnight. The most well-known legend tied to the bridge is the story of Oscar Washburn. According to local lore, Washburn was a black goat farmer who became well known for his high-quality meat, milk, and cheese. At some point, he put up a sign near the bridge that read, "This way to the Goatman." Now, you'd think the worst thing that could happen here would be a zoning violation, but unfortunately this was Texas in the 1930s, and a local organization of fools who like to dress up as ghosts at night, if you catch my drift, didn't take kindly to a successful black businessman. One night, a group of these fools dressed as ghosts dragged Washburn out of his home, took him to the bridge, and tossed him off of it, if you catch my drift. There was rope involved, but when they went down to the river to admire their evil handiwork, because apparently being a humiliation to humanity wasn't enough, they also had to be theatrical about it, they found nothing. The noose was empty, the water underneath undisturbed. They panicked. They rushed back to his house after this, and they set fire to it, because, again, theatrical. Whether Washburn escaped or passed away elsewhere, nobody really knows, but ever since this night, people say a vengeful spirit haunts this bridge. Nowadays, because of this bridge is the home to an urban legend that says if you knock 3 times on the steel trusses at midnight, or if you honk your horn 3 times, because ghosts apparently run in a very specific set of rules, we see this a ton, you might summon the Goatman. But before he appears, you'll get a little warning. The overwhelming stench of rotting flesh, which, to be fair, could also be the natural scent air acquires from Texas humidity and a dose of roadkill. Either way, it's probably not a great sign. Those who stick around after this scent, though, report glowing red eyes in the darkness, a snarling creature lurking in the trees, or even a full-on Goatman, because why settle for subtlety when you can have that? Sometimes the Goatman is even carrying heads. Goat heads, human heads, sometimes even rabbit heads. The stories go wild with this one. There are also some other stories about how the Goatman legend started, of course, other than this more prominent one. For instance, some say it's the result of a satanic ritual gone wrong. Others claim it's not Washburn at all, but his wife, eternally searching for their taken children and for Washburn himself. And then there's an even older version of the story dating back to the 1860s. In this one, a Creole slave named Jack Kindle he had his life ended near the creek that this bridge runs over. His body fell, but his head stayed, and in an incredible act of what the hell is going on, he got back up, grabbed a nearby goat, and made himself a new head, because apparently that was an option. Now, regardless of which version you believe, there's one thing everyone agrees on. If you mess with the bridge, the Goatman might just come for you. But don't worry, it's said that he only takes people descended from the aforementioned fools or slave owners we discussed. So if you suddenly get yanked into the woods, well, that's between you and your ancestors. Don't blame the Goatman. Also, like many of the places we'll cover here, there's another layer to the drama. Ghost hunters. And being a haunted spot in the woods where you can go wild with your ghost hunting without anyone seeing you, paranormal investigators flock here. This is really funny. I saw one YouTube video where a guy went to this bridge to ghost hunt, and he ran into someone already ghost hunting, and both of them thought the other were the Goatman. And then on the way back to his car, he ran into another ghost hunter who he also thought was the Goatman. It was seriously silly and hilarious. Anyways, as stated, ghost hunters have a ball here, trying to tease the Goatman out of the woods, and frankly, I can't blame them. Now, if you're wondering whether any of these stories I just shared with you are historically documented, The answer is sadly no. The names Oscar Washburn and Jack Kindle don't appear in any official records. And sadly, there's no Goatman on any local census forms. That's not how hauntings work, I suppose. And really, the sad truth in these legends isn't about the names or the dates, it's about the warnings they carry. Many states have their own Goatman legends, each reminding us that the past isn't as buried as we like to think it is. These stories aren't just about ghosts, they're about the way history lingers, how injustices refuse to be forgotten, and most importantly, how some things, like knocking on an allegedly haunted bridge at midnight, are just objectively poor ideas. I mean, do we even know if this bridge is structurally sound anymore and we should be knocking on it? Regardless, if you ever do visit the old Alton Bridge, now, again, it's officially the property of Shane Madej, maybe just don't knock 3 times, unless you're really sure about your family tree. If you have come here to Shane's Bridge, with his permission of course, let me know. Did y'all see anything interesting while you were here? Now, of course, while we're at it, we've got to move on to another bridge, the story of the Donkey Ladies Bridge. This story of the Donkey Ladies Bridge is a classic haunted place story, and a ritualistic urban legend that rests just outside of San Antonio. It's a tragic tale that's steeped in drama to the extent that you can feel its reverberations into modern day. First, regarding the legend itself, it's said that at some point in the 1800s near Elm Creek in San Antonio, a new family moved out into the proverbial neighborhood, and this family of course had donkeys. One day though, a wealthy man for whatever reason was passing by the home, and saw their donkey and started to tease it. Rich people out there in the comments, do you feel the need to tease donkeys too? I've never personally felt that urge, but I guess I'm not rich. Regardless, the donkey wasn't happy about this, and it would bite the rich dude. And then he would transition from annoying the donkey to actually beating it, upon which the donkey would begin to cry, luring the family outside, who threw rocks at the rich man. And then he threatened he would return later, which he actually did. Later that night, the rich man would return with his buddies, and would set fire to the family's home, with them blocked inside. First, the man of the family whose home was set aflame was able to break out, but he would immediately be shot. Next, his wife would break free, with no children with her, but she would be disfigured by the flames. Still on fire, she would run into the nearby creek, jumping over the modern-day old Applewhite Bridge and casting herself into the water below. As the story goes, her body never resurfaced, and here is where the modern-day haunting begins. See, during the day, this is just a pretty normal bridge, but at night, when tourists and locals from San Antonio flock to see this bridge and to all its haunted glory, it's said that strange things happen. To start, folks say that the air feels heavy and it feels like someone is watching them, which, I mean, come on guys, it's the middle of the night in a bridge. But perhaps less easily explained is that folks see the apparition of, or perhaps the living donkey lady in the woods. In addition to this apparition, folks frequently report that their cars end up dented when they visit the bridge, and those dents look strangely like hoofs slammed into the vehicle. So I guess if you've got a nice car, maybe leave that one at home. Now, in addition to this unprompted drama, it's said that you can actually summon the donkey lady by... Wait, I'll give you a second here. What do you think you have to do to summon her? You know it, I'm sure. You have to honk your horn 3 times. I swear, mid-1900s car culture is responsible for half of these ghost stories and urban legends. Anyways, if you do honk your horn, it's said that you might hear sounds of a donkey come from the nearby woods, and you might hear the hard clacking of hooves against the roof of your car as the donkey lady inspects your car, deciding what comes next. In short, the tale of Donkey Lady's Bridge is more than just a spooky legend. It's a haunting reminder of the tragic consequences of cruelty, and this creepy spot continues to captivate those who seek the unknown in the San Antonio area. So anyways, my advice, next time you find yourself near the old Applewhite Bridge, maybe think twice before honking your horn, unless, of course, you're ready to face the wrath of the Donkey Lady herself. In the quiet, twisting roads surrounding Austin, Texas, lies a dark and twisted landmark known as Dead Man's Hole. This near 160-foot deep pit, tucked away along the seldom-traveled Country Road 401 near Marble Falls, is certainly not your typical roadside attraction. Unless, of course, you're into deep, dark holes filled with history. There's a joke about someone I knew in college there somewhere. Regardless, while today it's marked with metal plates and a historical sign, the sinister story it tells is anything but typical. It's a tale steeped in Civil War-era bloodshed, haunted by spirits of the past, and wrapped in eerie legends that continue to send shiver down the spines of those brave enough to visit. The story of the Dead Man's Hole starts not with bodies, but with an entomologist, yes, an insect scientist named Ferdinand Luders. In 1821, Luders documented the hole, Trestle, which was likely formed due to natural gas eruptions in the area. Initially just a curiosity, it would go on to gain a much darker reputation. As the Civil War began to cast its long shadow over Texas, Dead Man's Hole would come to be associated with one of the most gruesome chapters of the war. Though Burnett County, where the hole is located, voted against secession in 1861, the area wasn't free from the violent tensions of the war. Known for its Unionist sympathies, the region saw Confederate bushwhackers, or as they were perhaps better known, fire eaters, scour the land, seeking out anyone suspected of supporting the Union. And when they found them, they made sure those unfortunate souls would never speak again. In modern day, this comparison doesn't age well at all, but at the time, they were said to have been worse than Indians when it came to violence, and they would, as noted, go out of their way to commit this violence in a stand for their cherished Confederacy. Thus, under the guidance of these so-called fire eaters, by the mid-1860s, Dead Man's Hole had found its grim purpose, a dumping ground for bodies of Union sympathizers put down by this group of deplorable individuals. It's kind of like the Civil War-era version of a bad breakup. Throw someone in a hole, never speak of it again, and hope they don't haunt you for the rest of eternity. Anyone who fell afoul of the fire eaters, whether by outspoken political beliefs or simple misfortune, was sentenced to meet a violent end. The hole, deep enough to swallow the dead and the guilty, became the final resting place for many, a silent witness to the cruelty of the era. Hauntingly, it's said that back in the day, right next to Dead Man's Hole, there was a tall oak tree, and by the end of the Civil War, it's said that this tree was scarred from the ropes that were used here to hang and conduct fake trials for these poor individuals. The first recorded victim of this gruesome practice was Burnett County Judge John R. Scott. Though he had 4 sons fighting for the Confederacy, rumors spread because he originally migrated from New York that he must have been a Union sympathizer, and this made him a marked man in the eyes of the fire eaters. He, of course, caught wind of this danger before he met his end, even attempting to escape to Mexico, but Scott was ambushed, blasted, and dumped into Dead Man's Hole. Other victims followed in quick succession: Adolph Hopp, a German settler, Henry Flower, a Unionist landowner, and James McMasters, a fellow victim of the vigilante justice of the time. By 1871, when the last recorded body was disposed of in Dead Man's Hole, it's believed that between 17 and 35 bodies had been discarded into the pit, their final moments forgotten by all but the land itself. At this point, the war ended, but the horrors didn't. Even after the bodies were dumped and the violence of the era passed, the legacy of Dead Man's Hole lingered, as if the spirits of the past couldn't rest. They remained tethered to the land, and as the story goes, visitors to the area soon began reporting strange occurrences. Phantom voices, cold drafts, and the eerie sensation of being watched when they were near the Devil's Hole. Some even claimed to feel tugging at their clothes, as though the dead were trying to pull them into the depths when they stood too close to the hole. Now, in 1866, the bodies that had been cast into the hole were finally retrieved, some by the families of the victims, though it's said that many more remained entombed in the dark, gas-filled caverns below. One chilling report claimed that during the retrieval process in the 1860s, some of the bones simply disappeared, further feeding the ghost stories that still haunt the area to this day. As the years wore on, this hole faded from immediate attention, buried under the weight of its dark history, and it wasn't until the 1860s that explorers were finally able to safely investigate the home, once blocked by dangerous gases that had kept it sealed for decades. In 1968, a metal plate was placed over the pit, preventing any more bodies from meeting their ultimate ends in the hellish depths, and in 1999, a portion of the land surrounding the hole was donated to Burnett County, and Dead Man's Hole was officially designated as a historical landmark. While it's now a quiet, accessible location for anyone curious about Texas's grisly past, it's hard to shake the feeling that the spirits of the dead still roam the site, as they have for over 150 years. Perhaps because of this, today Dead Man's Hole continues to be a site of interest for ghost hunters and history buffs alike. The area has earned a reputation as one of Texas's most haunted locations, with reports of eerie noises, sightings of ghostly apparitions, and even EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, recordings capturing chilling messages from the past. This is going to make me laugh, I just know it, but in one ghost hunting report I was reading, apparently someone caught an EVP of a young girl pleading, "No daddy, I just want to go to Dairy Queen," and legitimately claimed that they caught a ghost. Don't get me wrong, if you listen to the sound clip, it's pretty clear that their voice box absolutely caught that sound, but I mean, given Dairy Queen was founded in 1940 in Illinois of all places, I'm not sure you can claim this one's a Confederate-era haunting. But hey, what do I know? I'm just some YouTuber. Regardless, while some dismiss these claims as overblown, others swear that the malevolent energy in the pit still lingers. Whether it's the lingering spirits of those tossed into the hole or the general malevolence of the place, there's no denying that Dead Man's Hole has left an indelible mark on the landscape of Burnett County. So in the end, Dead Man's Hole stands as a grim reminder of the violence and division that marked the Civil War era. So if you find yourself in Texas, driving down the road and thinking, hey, I could go for a quiet walk by a hole filled with death and despair, this is your place. Just watch your step. The dead still might be pulling people in. Though it's now a quiet, somewhat unassuming part of Texas's backroads, it's impossible to visit without feeling the weight of the history that occurred here. And whether or not you believe in ghosts, there's no denying that this 160-foot deep pit holds a tragic place in the story of Texas. Alright, I understand that La Llorona is sort of native to a lot of western states and Mexico, but I think that La Llorona is worthy of discussion in this video because, well, there's a place in Texas whose very name is a nod to this legend, and as such, it is one of the many potential origin locations and stories for her. La Llorona herself is a figure both tragic and terrifying, a woman who roams the bank of creeks, ponds, and various other bodies of water, her mournful cries echoing across the water. Her tale is one of deep sorrow and regret, passed down through generations, reaching from one corner of the world to the next. The story usually goes something like this. La Llorona, the weeping woman, was once a beautiful young mother who lived a life filled with love for her children, but fate turned cruel. In some versions of the story, her husband abandoned her for another woman, and in her despair, she did the unthinkable. She drowned those little ones she loved so much in a fit of madness. As soon as the water took their lives, she was filled with remorse, but it was too late. Now, she is condemned to water the rivers and streams for eternity, forever searching for her lost children, crying out for them in the dead of night. Her cries are the sounds of a mother's grief, the anguish of a soul who can never find peace. The legend of La Llorona exists in many cultures, as I stated, but in Texas, her presence is especially felt in the haunting waters of a creek that runs near San Antonio, known as Woman Hollering Creek. This creek, named for the eerie sounds that rise from it, is a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs. The origin of the creek's name is kind of shrouded in mystery, as La Llorona herself is too, but some say that the creek got its name from the sound of a woman's voice, and that long ago, a woman could be heard crying across the water after she committed some heinous acts here. That sound, they say, was La Llorona herself, her mourning filling the air as she cried for her lost children, regretting her decisions. Others believe it's the name of a woman who was once wronged in love, whose heartache reverberated through the land. Now, as for the urban legend surrounding this place, it's said that as you stand at the edge of Woman Hollering Creek, at night you might you might hear the wailing yourself. Now, it might very well just be the wind rustling through the nearby trees, but some say it's something more. Of course, a sorrowful cry that stands out from the howls of those wind-whipped branches, and that it drifts through the air, especially on quiet nights when the creek runs swiftly and the moonlight dances on its surface. Some claim during these sorts of nights they can hear a voice of a woman that is faint but unmistakable. Now, regardless of what you believe, I love a place with an awesome name like this, a name that almost begs for an urban legend to be attached. So let me know below. Have you been to this creek? Have you heard the wailing? You know where to tell me. Marfa, Texas is the kind of place that makes you scratch your head and say, wait a minute, is this real life? It's a tiny town in the West Texas desert known for its art scene, quirky vibe, and the kind of isolation that makes you wonder if it's the world's best kept secret or if everyone just forgot about it one day. Now, if this description was enticing enough to get you to visit Marfa, you'll find that its main street is a charming mix of old-timey adobe buildings, a handful of hip galleries where you can pretend to be a modern art critique, and of course a cafe or two where the coffees are as strong as the winds that whip through the town. Marfa is the sort of place where time seems to slow down. No one's in a hurry, everyone's either pondering the meaning of life or discussing which local taco truck serves the best breakfast burrito. But the real magic of Marfa, if you ask any local or visitor, isn't necessarily the town itself. It's in the sky, or perhaps the horizon, in the form of strange lights, or perhaps mysterious glowing orbs that have been appearing near the town at night for over a century, popping up on the horizon, floating and dancing in ways that defy explanation. This is the story of the Marfa Lights. Since the 19th century, these lights have been a boon to the city, and everyone from Native Americans to bona fide scientists have observed the phenomenon, which dance, as I said, outside of the town, apparently along rugged terrain. These lights aren't any specific color. Sometimes they're blue, other times they're white, sometimes they're even red. And no, I don't think this is some strange patriotic gesture by aliens. Rather, according to some, it's something genuinely strange going on, as these little buggers are known to rocket across the plains at speeds rivaling those of an airplane sometimes, and even said to change direction at the drop of the hat. Now you might say, these are just the lights of distant cars. Well, are they? If you look on Google Maps, you'll see there aren't any major roadways on the horizon for quite some time. Because of this, a legend about the lights has popped up, claiming the lights are those of a lantern being carried by an Apache chief who lost his life on the plains outside of Marfa, and now spends the rest of his nights roaming those plains, lantern in hand, trying to find his way to the other side. Now, regardless of what the lights may be, you can see them frequently from a viewing area east of town along US 90, where folks flock throughout the year to watch these strange lights dance by. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's be clear. To many, these lights aren't actually strange at all. See, in 2009, a study was published following 8 years of research by one Carl D. Steffen, titled Spectroscopy Applied to Observations of Terrestrial Light Sources of Uncertain Origin. And in short, this paper claimed to mostly disentangle this phenomenon, essentially reporting that the atmospheric conditions outside of Marfa were relatively unique, and managed to frequently warp any light that comes from Highway 67, which is a relatively far 15 or 20 miles away from this viewing area. Basically, the conditions in the area just perfectly bend light so that it reaches the individuals at the viewing area, and because of the wonky path this light takes through the air, these lights that originally came from headlights or taillights now look more streaky or distorted, and move at all sorts of speeds, some fast, some slow, even occasionally darting upward or downward in a way that is uncharacteristic of typical headlights. This being said, though, don't be too sad. This mystery hasn't been entirely solved. Even the author of the paper we mentioned admitted in an interview with Vice.com, no less, that some of the reported and even photographed lights don't match the behavior he'd expect from a car headlight traveling this distance, and therefore the jury is still out on what some of these strange lights might be. Regardless of what the answer is, though, the Marfa Lights are a huge boon to the local economy, bringing in nearly $1 million to the municipality on an annual basis, much of which is procured during the annual Marfa Light Festival, which celebrates the lights with food, music, and even a parade before individuals gather outside of town to watch these ghostly lights pass by. Now, if you want to attend this event yourself, I bet it's a joy. It'll take place from August 29th through August 31st of 2025. Who knows, maybe I'll even be there telling you a story or two. Well, it's not like I've been invited yet, but hey, maybe someone will invite me. I love a quaint town, and a good story is icing on the cake. Now, if you watch my videos, you'll know a somewhat guilty pleasure of mine are ghost stories revolving around schools. I've said it before and I'll say it again. High school was a doozy for me. I was way too worried about what everyone else thought of me. Spoiler, they weren't thinking of me, and therefore I had a bad time. And gosh darn it, I can't even for a second fathom how bad my life would have been if, in addition to being a self-conscious mess of a child, I'd also been haunted by ghosts. Now, as it said, the poor students of El Paso High School actually have to go through this, and in their school, there's a notable ghost story that is passed down like a case of the common cold throughout the generations of students that walk these halls. Now, first, a bit of history. El Paso High School is also known as the Lady of the Hill, and it's a historic school with a rich history that started when it opened in 1916, featuring beautiful Greco-Roman architecture that earned it the title of National Historic Landmark. Also, during this time, a certain group of embarrassing man-children that liked to dress up like boo ghosts because they didn't like the prospect of equal rights pressured the school briefly to change its name to Sam Houston High School from 1922 to 1923, but this name was quickly changed back. Now, regardless of any checkered history, stuff happened here that was inevitable and terrible in a different sort of way, and these things, these roles that the building filled as the story goes, they stick with the high school. One extremely notable bit of history about the school is that during the World Wars, the school was used as an overflow morgue, holding bodies shipped home in the basement, largely those from World War II, and also some that passed away from the Spanish flu. Perhaps related to these bodies are reports of the basement playing host to a sealed classroom that, when unearthed, is in perfect condition, if a bit dusty, though regardless it goes unused with no explanation. It's said that when this classroom is brought up with administrators, it's said that they're less than happy that it was found, and they offer many excuses as to their lack of use before promptly sealing this back up again. Perhaps all of this strangeness is what culminates in the frequent reports of doors slamming and the sounds of crowds cheering. In particular, it's said that the gym can get loud after hours, as if a heated basketball game is going on inside. But when security guards and students alike open the gymnasium doors, they're consistently met with silence. Though one article I read did reference a police officer responding to a noise complaint that, upon opening the doors to the gym, did hear the sounds cease, but when he shone his flashlights into the bleachers, he saw they were filled with people, or perhaps a better description is the shadows of people. There's also a frequently reported apparition of a woman in a blue dress facing away from those that see her. This woman, of course, is thought to be a student on campus after hours, and teachers and security staff will often kindly approach them and let them know that the time has passed for them to head home. In reaction, the woman will turn around, and she'll give a sad look to whoever approached her before dematerializing in front of them. Now, this is not a happy topic, but it's said that this woman in the blue dress is the apparition of a woman who in the 1980s took a fateful fall from the balcony of the school, which could previously be accessed through a stairwell leading up to it, a stairway that has since been blocked off, mostly at least. Now, some brave few have actually snuck into this hallway, and a few of them have reported hearing weeping, while others report that strange fluid fell on them from the ceiling. In a high school, this is pretty gross to me. The most famous ghostly occurrence related to the school, though, is the class photo of the class of 1985. And in this photo, standing among the teachers, is the clearly semi-transparent image of a woman wearing a white dress. In this photo, the woman looks, well, clearly out of place, and some individuals have even been questioned as to who she was, noting that they had no recollection of who this woman might have been, only that her appearance in the photo was scary and very unwelcome. Of course, I probably shouldn't have to say this, but goodness gracious folks, this is an operating high school, and as such, if you visit, I don't think we can be friends. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this story of the supposed ghosts that haunt it, and if you yourself have spent time there or are currently a student there, I'd love to hear if these ghost stories are verifiable in your eyes. You know where to tell me down below. Just goodness gracious, adults out there, don't visit the high school and look for ghosts. The haunted tale of Bragg Road and the so-called Saratoga lights that you see while you're along it is a classic ghost light tale, even more back to basics than the tale of the Marfa Lights that we discussed just a few minutes ago. And I should note, it's nearly identical to some ghost lights we've discussed in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and also some said to be created by the so-called Hooker Man in New Jersey. This is the story of Bragg Road. So first, let's start with history. Bragg Road today sits close to Saratoga, Texas, hence the name of the phenomenon on it being the Saratoga Lights. Saratoga, Texas is a small community in Hardin County that holds historical significance due to its origins as a 19th century lumber and oil boom town. Founded in the late 1800s, it thrived with the discovery of oil in the nearby Batson and Saratoga oil fields, contributing to Southeast Texas's early petroleum industry. Today, Saratoga is not quite the booming oil town it once was, but remains a quiet rural community, primarily serving as a residential area with loose remaining ties to the lumber and oil industries, while also attracting tourists and paranormal enthusiasts drawn to its mysterious folklore we're about to talk about. But wait, why is this road named Bragg Road if it's near Saratoga? Well, good question. See, this road actually used to run from Saratoga to the now abandoned town of Bragg, a town that pretty much grew up around the Bragg station, which served a small farming community. When the railroad that ran through that largely transported lumber and supplies along the Santa Fe line fell out of use, the population of Bragg decreased, and in the early 1900s it would become a ghost town, with most of the locals moving elsewhere for employment. Anyways, that's pretty much the history of this place. As for the haunting, well, we're just getting started. The Saratoga lights that you'll see here are best described as mysterious bluish-white lights that vary depending upon your mode of transport. No, seriously, if you're driving a car, it's said that they'll rocket away from you without a chance in heck that they let you get close. If you're walking, however, some say they let you get a little closer and move away from you a little more slowly, almost like they're curious about you too, and want to take a better look. Regardless of how you chase these lights though, they'll never let you get to them. They'll always either fade away or sometimes it's reported they jet up into the sky when you get too close. They aren't really scary though. Those who have seen them more so report that they're playful, kinda almost friendly. So with this phenomenon in mind, what do people say they are? Well, the prevailing theory, of course, has to do with the railroad. Some say a conductor of old, while passing down this relatively populated stretch, declined to slow down. He was tired and he wanted to keep schedule, urging his train to go as fast as possible. But as he approached that line that separates risk and recklessness, some say he crossed it, and the train would ultimately derail, taking his head off. And ever since this event, it's said this conductor's body is actually what's roaming the railroad tracks, searching hopelessly for his head, so that he may one day come back together in one piece. No, this isn't another One Piece reference. Another legend says that this light is the lantern of a groom whose wife-to-be left him at their altar, running away down Bragg Road. Smitten, of course, this groom would chase after her, and for the rest of his life he would become fixated on Bragg Road as where she must have been. Thus, for the rest of his life, he would supposedly wander the road in search of his bride, fruitlessly, convinced that one day he would find her. Of course, he never would, but that doesn't stop him from continuing to look for his lost love in the afterlife. Side note here, I'm now picturing an old man, maybe 90 or 95 years old, walking down the road with a walker and a lantern, looking for his similarly extremely aged runaway bride, still in her wedding dress, running from him. Also a 90-year-old. I think that would make a great scene in a comedy. Finally, others say that this may be a case of the will-o'-the-wisp, a phenomenon seen the world across, where odd lights float in the sky, often over wetlands, and are always out of reach. These lights, historically speaking, are said to appear friendly, but in actuality, they are there to lure you towards bodies of water or cliffs, trying to get you to fall over the edge into the abyss, and that you have little chance of escaping. In reality, these will-o'-the-wisp-like phenomenon have often been associated with natural gas escaping from swamps and igniting in the air over them. But in this case, a quick look doesn't show much water in the area, so certainly no swamps. So perhaps this can't be described by the age-old will-o'-the-wisp explanation. So, to conclude, what could these lights actually be? Sure, folks say they're the lights of ghostly lanterns, but let's look towards the lights in Michigan, for instance. The Paulding lights. In this case, these Paulding lights were proven in 2010 by a group of Michigan Tech students to be pretty definitively attributable to passing cars. Using a telescope, they could zoom in on these phenomena, and clearly make out the fact that this single light observed from a distance was actually more accurately composed of car headlights and taillights, combining to form one strange-looking light. In the case of New Jersey, it was less clear, but strangely, the lights from the so-called hookermen there began when the railroad tracks were installed in the area and left when they were torn up, with many citing an odd electrical phenomenon possibly being their root cause. So anyways, what do you think? Maybe these lights can be explained by one of these things too. To be fair, there are roadways in the area, so maybe it's just a weird way light is bending that results in these strange lights, sort of like those at Marfa. Anyways, that's the story of Bragg Road. Have you seen these strange lights or heard a different story of where they come from? If you'll let me know, it would mean an awful lot. Also, you should totally let me know whether you think they're natural or supernatural. You know where to tell me. Alright, Driskill Hotel, let's see what you've got. Frankly, it'll take a lot to outdo a hotel we covered earlier in this list with Teddy freaking Roosevelt, but hey, I'm an equal opportunity spookster, so let's tell your story too. The Driskill Hotel, one of Austin, Texas's most iconic landmarks, was founded in 1886 by Jesse Driskill, a wealthy cattle baron born in Tennessee in 1824. Driskill moved to Texas in the mid-19th century, where he built a fortune supplying beef to the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Following the war, he expanded his cattle empire, becoming one of the largest ranchers in Texas. His success allowed him to pursue his dream of constructing a grand hotel in the state capital, envisioning it as a luxurious gathering place for politicians, businessmen, and travelers. Driskill spared no expense in building the hotel, spending an estimated $400,000 to create an opulent Romanesque-style structure featuring marble floors, stained glass windows, and ornate chandeliers. When it opened in 1886, it was the finest hotel in Texas, hosting lavish events and high-profile guests. However, Driskill's fortunes took a downturn after a severe drought devastated his cattle business, forcing him to sell the hotel just 2 years after its opening. Despite this early setback, the Driskill Hotel endured, becoming a staple of Austin's history and a favored site for political gatherings, including gubernatorial inaugurations. Today, it remains a luxury hotel, celebrated for its rich history, ghostly legends, and enduring connection to Texas's past. Anyways, let's get into its supposed ghosts. To start, Jesse Driskill himself is known to continue spending time here despite giving up the hotel. He's said to frequent the room that overlooks 6th Street and Brazos, and folks that stay in this room often report waking up in the middle of the night to see someone looking out the window while smoking a cigar. These individuals rarely report feeling scared, rather they're surprised, and the reaction they attribute to Driskill is that he looks at them with a nasty facial expression, almost like them, the guests, are the one trespassing in Driskill's room. I mean, I guess it was his hotel after all. Of course, when they flip the light switch on, the smell of smoke quickly dissipates, and suddenly, they're again all alone in the room. Then there's room 329, which is said to be haunted by a woman whose name is rarely agreed upon unless you ask a medium, and, well, let's just say multiple mediums have come up with multiple names. Take that as you will. The story goes that this woman checked into the rooms shortly after her fiancé called off their wedding. At first, her behavior seemed a little reckless, maybe even indulgent. She went on a shopping spree, buying everything she could possibly want. Designer clothes, fine jewelry, the best food money can buy, racking up a bill of about $40,000, which adjusted for inflation, that's closer to $100,000 today. This occurred in the 80s or 90s, from what I can tell. And after this extravagant day of retail therapy, well, let's just say she made a big boom, and then there was silence. When they found her, all of her newly purchased belongings were still there, covered in a fine red mist. Now, because of this, guests staying in the 3rd floor sometimes report seeing a woman staggering down the hallway, arms overloaded with shopping bags, making her way towards room 329, before slipping inside. But here's where things get weird. Later, when other guests make conversation about that lady with the impressive shopping haul, the ones actually staying in room 329 sometimes look confused because they didn't buy anything. It sounds like they weren't seeing a guest after all, but rather a lingering echo of the past. There's also a room on the 5th floor of the hotel that hosts a painting of a child holding flowers in one hand and a letter in the other, and many claim this painting shows the daughter of ex-U.S. Senator Temple Lee Houston, a daughter who actually passed away in a car accident. Now, nothing particularly weird happens around this painting, but folks that stay in the room that holds onto it generally feel watched. And sometimes they even say that as they walk down the halls, they feel someone tugging at the back of their pant leg. But that, of course, would have to be their imagination, right? Finally, perhaps the most famous eternal guest at the Driskill is an ex-president, Lyndon B. Johnson, who apparently went on his first date with his wife Lady Bird in this very hotel, and possibly their first soiree was here, if you catch my drift. Because of this, they frequently visited this hotel, and apparently he grew quite fond of the Driskill, visiting it frequently throughout his life. Heck, he even watched himself win the presidential election from the president's suite in this very building in 1964. Now, don't get me wrong, LBJ isn't doing cheap ghost stuff in this hotel. He isn't watching you take a spooky dookie or anything. Rather, he's often seen dancing with his wife in the mirrors of the hotel's ballroom. That's pretty much it. Sometimes people in there will simply glance at a mirror and briefly see the image of the two individuals that are not there dancing the night away in an eternal embrace. Frankly, of all of the ghosts here, I like this one. I don't think there's many of us that would complain about getting to spend eternity with the ones we love. It's what we hope to do every day anyways, isn't it? Welcome to Mineral Wells, Texas, a charming little town famous for one thing: water. But not just any water, magic water, the kind of water that, according to 19th century health enthusiasts, could cure everything from dementia to ingrown toenails. People would travel from far and wide just to get a sip of the local mineral-rich elixir, affectionately known as crazy water, because nothing's as trustworthy like branding your miracle cure after insanity. The main figure behind this hotel was Texas businessman T.D. Baker, or Theodore Brasher Baker, and in life he was a prominent Texas hotel magnate. In the early 20th centuries, he gained recognition for designing and building grand hotels, including the Baker Hotel in Dallas and the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth. In 1922, citizens of Mineral Wells, Texas, too, sought his expertise to develop a large hotel that would capitalize on the town's famed mineral waters. This collaboration led to the construction of the Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells, which opened its doors in 1929 as a 450-room luxury retreat where the rich, the famous, and the sick could all come together to bathe in mineral water and pretend the Great Depression wasn't happening. The hotel quickly became a hotspot for Hollywood elites, infamous gangsters, and legendary comedians. Bonnie and Clyde, they checked in. The Three Stooges slapped each other silly here. Judy Garland probably clicked her heels and wished she was anywhere else. Unfortunately, even magic water, though, couldn't save the Baker Hotel from financial ruin. Just 3 years after opening, the stock market crashed, and the hotel went bankrupt. But like these stories that now call this place home, the hotel refused to die. New owners would swoop in to purchase and revive it. Then World War II turned it into a military dependent quarters before, after the war, it would again become a hotel in the 1960s, serving this purpose until 1972, when the doors would shut for good. The thing is, though, while having these doors shut to guests went a long way towards keeping modern-day individuals off the premises, a few measly doors couldn't keep the spirits of those who had spent time here in the past from wandering these hallways once more. This, in particular, is what the Baker Hotel is known for today. Since we're jumping into these ghost stories, let's start with the main event, T.D. Baker himself. Rumor has it he still haunts his masterpiece, particularly his 11th floor suite. In this room, it's traditional for guests to knock before entering, because nobody wants to anger the ghost who spent the latter portion of his life running the hotel. Here, guests have reported the overwhelming smell of cigar smoke, and the oh-so-common event of items mysteriously disappearing only to reappear hours later. Usually, these items are lying on the floor of the room right in the center, as if Baker is admitting he's just had his fun and wants them to find their belongings in the most obvious place possible. Again, I find it perplexing that this sort of behavior is attributed to ghosts the world across when I'm perfectly capable of losing my things without any help at all. And then there's Baker's mistress, the star of the 7th floor. This mistress, however, may not have been there by her own free will. The stories I'm reading claim that she was kind of kept in this hotel, and that one day she realized her only means of escape might have been through a window, if you catch my drift. Now, nobody quite knows why she decided to use this emergency exit, but some think the guilt over the affair she was having may have been too much for her. Regardless, this woman, of course, is said to haunt this place today, and guests often report a run-in with her when they smell her signature lavender perfume or hear her ghostly high heels clicking down the halls. Also, some tall tales suggest that this woman, whose apparition can sometimes be sighted with beautiful locks of red hair and dark green eyes, actually has a habit of taking a liking to some male visitors to the hotel. So if your mama told you were handsome growing up, be careful. You might expect to be poked, prodded, or whispered to in the dead of night by this woman. We're not done yet with ghosts, by the way. There's a ghostly bellhop that's said to remain in this hotel, and this story is probably the most gruesome of all of them in this hotel. If you remember back to our Michigan video, we actually recounted a story where a young woman was fooling around in an elevator and managed to get, well, decapitated. Turns out this wasn't such a rare thing back in the day. See, historical records of the Baker Hotel have actually 100% confirmed that on the premises, an elevator boy got cut in half while working his shift in the 1950s in this hotel. Man, imagine you're just working your shift as an elevator boy. You're thinking about how you're going to go home and binge some Sopranos after work, or maybe respec to Monk in Baldur's Gate, when suddenly, boom, you're watching your legs go down the elevator without you. What a pain. Regardless, guests have seen this bellhop's ghost, well, at least his top half, floating through the halls, probably still waiting for his tips. In this hotel, there's also the spirit of a young boy who passed away in the 1930s, and this one's kind of sad. It said this boy passed from less nefarious and more tragic means, leukemia. But fret not, it said this boy's best friend, his dog, passed away around the same time as him, and if you believe the ghost hunters of modern day, which, hey, I'm willing to humor as long as they're not going to turn on one of those freaking ghost boxes, he likes to wander the halls. Some say of the 3rd floor, but he's not alone. Folks often report seeing this young boy with a large, shaggy dog beside him. I don't know why, for some reason this one makes me smile. I'm glad this boy gets his puppy in the afterlife. Regardless, this young boy is known to communicate with mediums that visit, and even occasionally ask them for help. Something I should note that most ghost hunters that visit this place claim is the exception to the rule because, I kid you not, most mediums, ghost hunters, and all that jazz literally claim the ghosts here are downright relaxed and happy to be spending eternity in this hotel. Maybe it's the good company. Maybe it's all that luxury of old that remains in whatever dimension they occupy. Who knows? All I know is it's reported these ghosts are happy for whatever reason. Now, as for the final haunting in the Baker Hotel, they don't quite say any specific ghost is responsible for this, but they say that the windows here essentially have a mind of their own, and that in the 1990s, a local bank teller started noticing that windows would be open on various floors in the morning, only to mysteriously close themselves later in the day. Keep in mind, at this point the hotel was closed. No one was inside. No one had the keys. Either these spirits take window maintenance very seriously, or they're just having a good laugh at our expense. I guess we can also humor the very real and perhaps scarier possibility that someone, or maybe multiple someones, squatters perhaps, or maybe a group of them, were living in this abandoned hotel and needed to air it out. To be frank, Texas is hot, and I too would want to keep the cooler nighttime air inside once it warmed up later in the day. So that's the haunting of the Baker Hotel. While it's said that there are many ghosts here, they're luckily not exactly the tortured, vengeful kind. Rather, it seems the hotel, even in death, remains a place of comfort and relaxation for these guests of old. Perhaps this atmosphere is why there's a plan to restore it. That's right, folks. Soon you may have the chance to book a room in this historic and supposedly haunted healing hotel. Would you be brave enough to spend the night? Let me know in the comments below, and if you do end up visiting, enjoy your stay. The Texas state capitol in Austin is more than just a seat of government. It's a 302-foot-tall, towering symbol of Texas pride built with ambition, controversy, and maybe even a touch of misfortune. The story of its construction is filled with grand visions, questionable deals, and the kind of drama that practically invites ghost stories. The original State House, a modest wooden structure from the 1850s, was nothing to brag about. And when it burned to the ground in 1881, Texas saw an opportunity. The state needed something bigger, bolder, something that declared to the world that Texas was not just another state, but the state. The result was the current Capitol, designed to mimic the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., except naturally it was taller. But building this grand monument didn't come easy. Texas didn't have the money to pay for such an extravagant project, so they struck a deal: 3 million acres of panhandle land in exchange for funding the Capitol's construction. This land, later known as XIT Ranch, became the largest cattle ranch in the world. The deal made out-of-state investors very rich, while everyday Texans, including many settlers already living on that land, got little in return. Then there was the issue of labor. Originally, the plan was to use prisoners for much of the work, because why pay for labor when you have a free workforce? But when public outage grew, the state hired migrant workers instead. These workers, many of them on parole from prison, endured grueling conditions, injuries, and even deaths to build the Capitol's now famous pink granite walls. By the time it was finished in 1888, the Texas State Capitol was a masterclass in architecture, power, and, some say, lingering spirits. Over the years, stories have circulated about strangeness lingering in this building, and of course, because of that, it is my sworn duty to tell you about some of those who gave their sweat, blood, and possibly their lives for the Capitol, and never truly left. To start, let's talk about what we've already alluded to. Poor souls, often migrant workers, that lost their lives during the construction of this building. It's said that at least one ghost on this premises is that of an ex-construction worker who took a sad and fateful fall from the Capitol building as he worked here. This ghost is attributed with strange noises throughout the Capitol, such as those that, to some, sound like footsteps, or perhaps tools being used in empty halls throughout the Capitol building. He doesn't really do anything bad per se, but he makes a bit of noise and is always just out of reach. Then there's an old legislator that used to work here. He apparently enjoys spending time in the old legislative reference library on campus. This man is also pretty polite to guests, as ghosts go, in the sense that he doesn't really try to scare or off ya, but he's known to sit at a table after hours, and he diligently does his work, appearing as more of a outline of a person than an actual person, if you catch my drift. Almost like a cloud of mist is sitting there and performing a day job. Also, most famously, there's the lady in red in the Capitol building. This woman is, well, wearing red, big shocker I know, and she doesn't walk. No, she glides, like those kids that rode hoverboards around college campuses throughout the 2010s. Some, of course, think this is the ghost of the wife of one of the legislators who passed away on the premises. This ghost, again, is relatively polite and safe, I say in quotes, but seeing her does result in feeling cold spots, or individuals hearing footsteps behind them after seeing her, only to turn around and see absolutely nothing. So what have we learned? The Texas state capitol isn't just a towering symbol of Texas pride, it's also home to some lingering and thankfully well-mannered spirits. Whether these spirits are the real deal or just a little too much time spent in Austin's summer heat, one thing's for sure, the Capitol was built on big dreams, big land deals, and a whole lot of questionable decision-making. And if ghosts are real, well, let's just say Texas's boldest building wouldn't be caught dead without a few. Oh man, we're back to another place the Ghoul Boys have visited. The so-called Haunted Hill House in Mineral Wells, Texas. Regarding the supposed history of the Hill House as told by the owners, it's storied to say the least. According to them, this house was built in the late 1800s, and throughout its history, it's been everything from a boarding house for sick people who came to bathe in the healing wells on the premises, to a speakeasy, to a brothel where people would hole up for the night and perform unsavory acts. If you buy the history, the owners even say that an individual named William Barclay Kyle, an early Texas Ranger, was one of the founders of the home. All of this culminates in this haunted 3,800 square foot Victorian mansion, which today is essentially run as a ghost hunting Airbnb. And you, if you're feeling ambitious, can stay the night in this Airbnb yourself. Now, as for the actual ghosts on the premises, to start, many ghost hunters that visit the premises say that there's a young boy named Joshua. This kid has a playful voice, and he resides near the staircase, and apparently on the premises, according to ghost hunters and mediums and such, you know what I think about them, he died under mysterious circumstances. Again, there's really no credence to this. There's no death certificates in the area of a boy named Joshua, as far as I can tell. I looked them up. And there's no articles in any newspapers linking any deaths on the property to a boy. There's also a room in the house referred to as the Scratch Room, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a room where people have apparently gotten mysterious scratches on their bodies. Also, there's a basement, and as you know, in every basement in a place that's old, people say it's haunted. And here the owners, and also some paranormal investigators, claim there's a portal. And from this portal, people hear growls. It might just be their tummies, though. But apparently some of these growls have been captured on audio, and they kind of sound like an animal growling, I guess. But seriously, it might just be a tummy in the audio I heard. Regardless, spooky stuff goes on in the basement, apparently. There's also the story of a ghostly woman who apparently laughs throughout the halls of the Hill House, but of course is rarely ever seen. And this laughter is often accompanied by feelings of cold air rushing past them and feelings of dizziness. Finally, of course, it's said that W.B. Kyle himself is sometimes seen on the property as a full-bodied apparition. He doesn't actually try to interact with guests like some other full-bodied apparition. He's more of a recording of past events playing out. So in short, in terms of the ghost here, there's nothing particularly nefarious that actually happens in this home. But I should note, the scariest thing about this home is that despite being a ghost hunting Airbnb that on its website claims a bunch of history, there's actually quite a bit of controversy surrounding whether the history they list is actually real or not. So at the start of this segment, I recounted the history to you as told by the owners. And admittedly, I did some digging, and that history diverges a bit from what you can find if you do a bit more sleuthing. Also, credit to DeerCan7636 on Reddit for digging up some of this information and providing sources to back it up. So anyways, your first whiff that this story might not be 100% accurate comes from looking up William B. Kyle's obituary on findagrave.com, which places his passing right at 1886, which might make one curious whether the home was really built in the late 1800s. Because of this, you can look further into local property records and look up the address of the home, and it confirms that this house was actually built in 1906, which is, remember, after William Barclay Kyle actually died, and after his daughter Sarah died, who is another individual that's sometimes said to haunt this house, so that doesn't really make sense. Furthermore, in the recounted history of this home, they say that William Barclay Kyle was actually the founder of the home, and you can find details that refute that too, and even refute that William Barclay Kyle didn't actually live on this plot of land, although, who knows, it's a little bit dubious. Anyways, if you look hard, you can find that the widow of William Barclay Kyle, who was named Fanny Yeager, and her sister, on September 2nd, 1902, contracted someone to build them a 6-room home, and this listing in the Mineral Wells newsprint even mentions a large hill being behind the land the home would be built on. So I think we found our property here. In short, I'm not going to keep going down this rabbit hole, but there's ample evidence that W.B. Kyle was in no way, shape, or form connected to this home or the land it sits on, which was more likely than not the property of the Yeager family actually originally. So in short, I'm not saying this is a scam or anything. Who knows, maybe the family that owns the home has historical documents that go into more detail than what you can find on the internet. But personally, I'm pretty disillusioned that in just a few minutes of sleuthing, you can easily discredit the most famous haunting on the premises, that of W.B. Kyle. Regardless, folks, including the Ghoul Boys, say that this house is relatively spooky, so who am I to say their experiences aren't real? Nestled in the rolling hills of southern Texas, the Frio River Valley has long been a haven of natural beauty. Known for its clear waters and cool temperatures, the valley has drawn settlers, ranchers, and adventurers for centuries. The name Frio means cold in Spanish and is a testament to the river's refreshing embrace even in the heat of the summer. The valley's history is woven with stories of perseverance, hardship, and the enduring spirit of people who have called it home. The early 20th century saw the valley dotted with ranches where families worked the land and built lives along the river's banks. Among them was the Jimenez family, whose 2 daughters were known for their beauty and kindness. The elder daughter of this family married a vaquero named Gregorio, while the younger, Maria Jimenez, remained at home, dreaming of one day having a family of her own. Maria was known for her nurturing spirit, often caring for her nieces and nephews as though they were her own children. As she grew older, Maria fell in love with a ranch hand named Anselmo Tabar, and the two planned to marry, but love can be a dangerous thing when tangled with jealousy. Maria's beauty did not go unnoticed by her brother-in-law Gregorio. Over time, his admiration twisted into something darker, a passionate obsession that blinded him to reason. Unable to contain his feelings, Gregorio professed his love for Maria, pleading with her to be with him instead of Anselmo. Horrified by the betrayal to her sister and repulsed by Gregorio's advances, Maria rejected him outright. This rejection, of course, festered into rage, and one fateful evening, Maria made her way to the banks of the Rio Frio, expecting to meet Anselmo, but instead she found Gregorio waiting for her. His face contorted with anger and heartbreak. In a moment of violent despair, Gregorio drew his revolver and blasted Maria in the chest. The river, which had once been a place of joy and romance, bore witness to her final breath. Maria's tragic passing sent shockwaves through the valley. Her sister was inconsolable, and Anselmo was devastated. The town, horrified by the senseless crime, quickly turned against Gregorio. A search party found him hiding in a barn, his face pale with fear, his hands trembling. He confessed to the crime, was tried, and sentenced to prison. Justice was served, but it did little to ease the sorrow of those who had loved Maria. Maria would ultimately be found in an unmarked grave in the Rio Frio cemetery. Her dreams of love and family left unfulfilled, but her story did not end there. As the years passed, whispers of strange occurrences began to circulate. Children lost in the valley would later recall a woman in white who led them home. Travelers along the river at dusk spoke of a misty figure gliding along the water's edge. And on foggy nights, when the valley was cloaked in a ghostly white, many claimed to hear the sorrowful whispers of a woman calling out for her lost love. The White Lady of Rio Frio had been born. Unlike the many vengeful spirits of legend, Maria's ghost is said to be one of compassion. Those who have encountered her tell stories not of fear, but of an overwhelming sense of peace. She watches over the children of the valley, comforting them in her dreams. She stands guard along the riverbanks, guiding lost souls to safety. And on the nights when the mist rolls in and thick over the water, those who listen carefully might hear her gentle voice, forever waiting, forever hoping for the love that was stolen from her. So that's the story of the White Lady of the Rio Frio. What do you think? Is it merely a tale passed down through the generations, or is there truth in the whispers of the valley? Everything is bigger in Texas, including its universities, rivalries, and apparently its obsession with livestock mascots. Before the University of Texas was even a twinkle in the state's eye, Texas A&M was already up and running in 1876 as the state's first public institution of higher learning, thanks to the Morrill Land Grant Act, which was basically the government's way of saying, here's some land to go learn how to farm. Texas A&M started as an agricultural and mechanical college. It was a place where young men could study engineering, tend to cattle, and develop a deep, undying love for yelling at football games. But in the beginning, A&M was more than just a school. It was a military institution, and attendance was not optional. Every student was part of the Corps of Cadets, meaning they had to march, drill, and probably wake up too early for comfort. This discipline shaped A&M's culture into something unique, a school where tradition reigns supreme, whether it's the midnight yell practice, the 12th man, or referring to anyone who didn't go to A&M as a 2%er. Of course, no discussion of Texas A&M is complete without mentioning Reveille, the school's beloved collie mascot. She's technically a general in the Corps of Cadets, which means she outranks some of the students, and if she barks in class, it's said the professor is supposed to dismiss everyone. With a rich history, a deeply ingrained military past, and an almost cult-like commitment to tradition, it's no surprise that A&M has its fair share of ghost stories. With that, let's get into our discussion of the other side of the 12th man. The students, faculty, and mascots that never left. To start, my impression is that the most haunted place on campus is without question the Animal Industries building, and that has a gruesome story attached. The story that supposedly led to this haunting is very real, and that actually follows a man named Roy Sims, a meat locker room foreman who on November 14th of 1959 was cutting some bacon in the basement, but his knife would slip and nick him in the groin, right in the femoral artery. When his coworker returned, he would find Sims unconscious but beyond saving, and later this evening, Sims would supposedly pass away. Of course, while Sims' body would pass on in this incident, it said his spirit remained, and thus in modern day there are whispers that everything is not normal in the Animal Industries building. To start, the legend goes that when Sims' coworkers returned to him, he would actually find Sims bleeding, and he was trying to reach the elevator to get help. And while he didn't actually make it there, in modern day individuals supposedly report hearing screams coming from the elevator shaft, even when there's nobody inside of the elevator car. Students, professors, and janitors alike have supposedly reported this phenomenon. Additionally, janitors who are brave enough to go down to the basement where Sims passed away report that meat hooks down there, the ones that held meat when Sims worked in the building, have a habit of hanging downright horrible things. In one account I saw, a janitor flat out quit his job after looking at the meat hooks that were empty just moments before, only to see the specter of Sims hanging from them, mouth agape. Man, oh man, that would be a no for me, dog. Now, beyond the Animal Industries engineering building, it's said that Francis Hall is also a doozy, to say the least. Nobody has quite assigned a name to the individual that haunts it, but for whatever reason, a woman in a white nightgown is frequently seen floating her way through the halls here. My impression is that this ghost is a favorite among the school's paranormal society, and members of this society frequently report screaming as they investigate this building. Additionally, I found mention that janitors that attend to this building, particularly between the hours of 4:30 and 6 a.m., are known to experience strange things. See, these janitors know they're not alone. They unlock the doors to get in and lock them behind them, but despite this, they've heard the sounds of coughing. They've seen bathroom stall doors slam shut on the second floor, and perhaps most chilling, one janitor has reported to see the handle of her mop swinging back and forth in the air before collapsing to the side of the bucket. Finally, it's not just academic buildings that are haunted. No way. It's also said that Kyle Field has a spirit to call its own, too. But lucky for y'all, this one isn't scary. It's actually pretty fun. It's said that students that go on field, particularly those with an abundance of school spirit, can sometimes feel a sharp pain in their booties. That's right, a quick nip if you will. Guess what's haunting this place yet? That's right, it said that Reveille 5, the school's doggeroni mascot, is sticking behind to bite future Aggies right on their arse because apparently even in the afterlife she's still a good girl. And this is what she did in life when she craved attention. I must say, that's a heck of a good girl. If I were there, I'd be honored to have my butt bitten by a good old dog. The University of Texas wasn't supposed to be just another college. It was meant to be a university of the first class, that's a direct quote. At least, that's what the Texas Constitution of 1876 declared. But Texas being Texas, it took a while to actually get around to this. The idea had been floating around since 1839 when the Republic of Texas set aside 40 acres of land in Austin for a future university. For decades, the land just kind of sat there, probably home to nothing but scrub grass and maybe the occasional longhorn. By the time the University of Texas finally opened its doors in 1883, it had one building, 8 professors, and 221 students, all of whom were probably sweating profusely because air conditioning wouldn't be invented for another 50 years. And man, I've been to Austin in May and I don't want to think about what the rest of the summer is like. Meanwhile, over in College Station, Texas A&M had already been up and running since 1876 though, specializing in agriculture and mechanics and an undying devotion to maroon polo shirts, as I said. Unlike A&M, which started as a military and farming school, University of Texas was built to be an academic institution and research powerhouse, a beacon of knowledge that would shape the future of Texas. Of course, one of the real Texas traditions is feuding, and the University of Texas quickly found itself at odds with A&M. The rivalry would eventually give us Bevo, UT's famous Longhorn mascot who, fun fact, was once kidnapped and branded by some particularly bold Aggies. To be fair, when your school's symbol is a literal steer, you've got to expect some cowboy shenanigans. With its prestige, size, and oil-funded $40 billion endowment, UT would end up becoming the state's undisputed academic giant. But with great history comes great hauntings, and UT has more than its fair share of ghost stories. So let's talk about the ghosts of UT Austin, because the only thing scarier than student loan debt is a spirit who never graduated. So if you're looking for something haunted on the University of Texas campus, you might as well start with the oldest building, the Littlefield Mansion. This 3-story Victorian home is as fancy as it is eerie. Today, it mostly hosts social events and office spaces, but every now and again, guests report seeing a woman in a full Victorian dress gliding between rooms down the hallway. And listen, I love a good party trick, but generally speaking, living people don't glide, at least the ones I know. Maybe it's those people from Ohio. Anyways, security guards have also had their fair share of encounters. After events have long since wrapped up and the place has been cleaned, some report hearing footsteps echoing through the house. Others swear they've heard whispers coming from empty rooms, but of course when they check, there's nobody there. Guests taking photos during tours have even looked back later to find unexpected extras in the frame, people who weren't there at the time. Some of these figures appear slightly translucent, while others manifest as the infamous orbs that, let's be honest, we all know are probably just fancy dust particles or bugs at this point, right? But the creepiest phenomenon is the piano on the second floor. Students walking past at night claim it sometimes is playing all on its own, despite the room being completely dark. Meanwhile, people working in the mansion office spaces have seen objects fly off of desks and countertops without explanation. And while I'd love to blame these flying objects on overworked grad students losing their minds, there seems to be a pattern here. So, who's the ghostly resident? Most say it's Alice Littlefield, the wife of George Littlefield, a wealthy businessman and major UT donor. George funded several buildings on campus, including the Littlefield Dormitory, where Alice may have also expanded her ghostly presence. In life, it's said that Alice actually mentored young women living in this dorm, and in death, it seems that she's still keeping an eye on things. Women living there have reported seeing a woman in full Victorian dress gliding through the halls too, just like in the mansion, and some even wake up in the middle of the night to see her standing silently gazing out of their windows. Others report hearing strange noises, including phantom snoring, which honestly is the funniest possible ghostly trait. Imagine being eternally cursed to haunt a dorm room, but all you do is take a ghost nap. That said, Alice isn't a menacing spirit. Most students say that she feels more like a protective presence, a guardian rather than a terror. And honestly, that's kinda sweet. If you're gonna have a ghost, it might as well be one who's checking in on your well-being and ensuring you're getting enough sleep. Now, if you'd rather encounter ghosts who are stressed out and working on a deadline, head on over to the basement of Moody College, home of the Daily Texan, UT's student newspaper. Apparently, late at night, people are known to hear phantom voices in empty rooms, keyboards clicking on their own, and most disturbingly, the sounds of a pin furiously scratching across a desk right next to them despite no one actually writing. Now, as someone who stays up way too late writing about ghost stories, I have a theory here. Late night writing paranoia is a real thing. You're staring at a screen long enough, fueled only by caffeine and deadline anxiety, and your brain starts hearing things. Case in point, as I'm writing this, it's 11:15 p.m., my wife is asleep, and every time the washing machine makes a weird noise, I nearly jump out of my chair. Ghosts? I don't think so. Exhaustion-fueled delusions? Maybe. And finally, what's a haunted college campus without a mysterious underground tunnel? UT's tunnel system runs pipes, wiring, and utilities beneath campus, but the utility workers who maintain them tell a different story. Some have reportedly heard disembodied voices echoing through the tunnels, and others have seen shadows flicker past them. In the dimly lit corridors, despite being completely alone, and listen, I don't care how much air conditioning or Wi-Fi you're running through those tunnels, if the pipes are also haunted, I'm dropping out. Now, I know that it's a little disappointing that there's no ghostly bevo roaming the campus, but honestly, UT isn't all that haunted compared to some other schools. Maybe it's because it's a little younger than A&M, maybe it's because it's too busy winning football games, or maybe it's because nobody wants their study session interrupted by a Victorian ghost muttering about the price of corsets amidst all of this inflation. Baylor University isn't just Texas's oldest continuously operating university. It's also one of the most mysterious. Founded back in 1845 when Texas was still its own country, Baylor had plenty of time to accumulate history, traditions, and of course a few ghosts. Originally established in Independence, Texas, the university later moved to Waco in 1886, where it grew into the sprawling campus it is today. Home to top-tier academics, a legendary football program, and 2 live bear mascots who live better than most of the students. Now, speaking of traditions, Baylor takes them seriously. Whether it's running the Baylor line, tossing tortillas at football games, or maintaining one of the largest Baptist student bodies in the country, this university knows how to keep things interesting. But with great history comes great hauntings, and Baylor has more than a few eerie tales too, lurking in the shadows of its stately brick buildings and quiet campus corners. Also, fair note here, I just kind of decided to loop everything within like a mile of Baylor into this description of the hauntings on campus. I mean, I'd guess the students experience them regardless. To start, if you thought English literature was scary enough on its own, welcome to Armstrong Browning Library. This library is supposedly haunted by 3 spirits: a poetry-loving ghost, a tragic construction worker, and a statue with a penchant for moving its arms at night, which is totally normal, right? The library largely houses the personal belongings of 19th century poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and apparently she didn't get the memo that she's been dead since 1861. Because of this, students and staff claim to see her ghost on the 2nd floor, peering out of the windows or roaming among the bookshelves, because nothing says eternal rest like hanging around a university library. Then there's the unfortunate preacher electrician who met his end when an elevator dropped on him during construction in the 1950s. Now, I guess because the old preacher pulled some strings from beyond the grave, the library's elevator is notorious for malfunctioning. Doors randomly open and close, and there's basement poltergeist activity. Also, electronics glitch out, the gift shop gate unlocks itself. Also, as for that statue we discussed, the oh-so-credible ghost hunters have even tried to capture movements from Pippa, the statue outside. Her arms, which should be at her sides, because she's a rock statue, she generally stays put, sometimes in shadows appear raised over her head, which, according to my understanding of how rocks work, should very much break the arms of the statue, but regardless, believers blame it on ghosts. I mean, what is this thing, a weeping angel from Doctor Who? If so, we should be far more concerned about it. Next up, we've got Brooks Hall, which was built in the early 20th century to attract more male students, because apparently the dorms next to First Baptist Church weren't cutting the mustard. At some point in this hall's life, a student dwelled on the 5th floor, and he became known for playing the violin, but then he passed away. How? No one's really entirely sure. Some say the flu got him, others say he just left Baylor one day and never came back instead of actually passing away. But either way, the music did not stop. Nowadays, students report hearing violin music, and on one particularly stormy night, apparently a group of students followed the sound of violin only to see a shadowy figure in a top hat and a cape holding a candle inside, which sounds a bit more like the Hat Man than a violin-playing student. Regardless, the second they spotted him, thunder cracked and a window shattered, and like any reasonable people, they left the building. When they returned in the morning, they found no shattered glass and no trace of any ghostly violinist or top hat wearing spooky dude, just their pride lying in shambles. And to make things weirder, Baylor later renovated the dorm, removing the entire 5th floor, and as the legend goes, nobody has heard the violin since. Who knows, maybe this renovation was just the push the old violinist needed to move on to the afterlife. Next up, we've got the Carroll Science Hall, where an old university president supposedly still dwells. As the story goes, when Baylor president Rufus C. Burleson envisioned Carroll Science Hall, he probably didn't plan on haunting it. But after he passed away before its completion, his wife, Georgia, visited the finished building, only to walk right back out, claiming she had just seen her husband's ghost. She was so disturbed by the experience that she never set foot inside again, which honestly is totally fair. I guess she was sick of him at that point. Regardless, some still say they see old Rufus roaming the halls of this building and that he's still got this absolutely demented haircut. Next, as I said we would, we're moving off campus to a couple of places that are not necessarily part of campus, but I betcha a bunch of students go to. First off, we've got the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame and Museum, a spot which houses a collection of historic weapons, including guns belonging to infamous outlaws Bonnie and Clyde. Now, if horror movies have taught us anything, it's that you shouldn't keep a bunch of boomsticks in one place and expect everything to be fine. According to the museum staff, the ghostly remnants of the past make themselves known at night. Visitors apparently report hearing the unmistakable clicking of firearms, cocking, and by morning, Bonnie and Clyde's weapons, along with the weapon that belonged to the Texas Ranger who caught them, are often found mysteriously cocked and ready to fire. Of course, there's never any ammunition in these old firearms of the past, but either way, they are said to occasionally be cocked. In my professional opinion, this must mean that the ghosts are reenacting old shootouts, or the museum has a deeply unsettling maintenance issue. Either way, these are firearms we're talking about. Somebody had better get to the bottom of this. Next up, Baylor's most famous beverage, Dr. Pepper, also has its own ghost story. Seriously, did you know that Dr. Pepper is Baylor's official drink? As the story goes, in 1953, a massive tornado ripped through Waco, and a Dr. Pepper museum employee named Shorty was crushed while moving delivery trucks to safety. Today, because of this, it's said that old Shorty still lingers, and visitors claim to feel pressure on their chest and even taste blood in their mouths when they walk near the spot where Shorty passed away. Also, if that's not enough, paranormal investigators like to use dowsing rods to talk to Shorty, who, despite his untimely end, seems to have a good sense of humor, probably because he gets to haunt a soda museum, which has to be one of the more unique afterlife alternatives out there. And last but not least, there's the nearby Oakwood Cemetery, which is said to be home to more than a few lingering spirits. But the most famous one might be W.C. Braun, the 19th century newspaper editor who made a career out of offending the wrong people. He was notorious for criticizing Waco's elite, including Baylor students, which eventually got him obliterated in a duel with an angry Baylor parent. Okay, I have to laugh at this. As someone that's been in education before and has had my fair share of angry emails from parents who wanted their students to get A's for doing absolutely nothing, I would have had a great chuckle if one of them challenged me to a duel. I don't think I would have said yes, though, because I wouldn't have won, but it would have been a good laugh. Now, regardless of how he passed, his ghost is often spotted leaning against a tree near his grave, possibly still waiting for the last word. And also, humorously, in a final insult, someone actually shot the engraving of his face on his tombstone because apparently even in death, Baylor's enemies aren't safe. Anyways, it seems you folks in Waco know how to have a good time, and I'm here for it. I'm glad you've got plenty of spooky stories, all your own to tell. And finally, on our list of haunted campuses, I thought I'd throw some love to you horned frogs. Also, quick football tidbit, I'm still confused how y'all beat Michigan back in 2022. But regardless, y'all gained my respect that night, and therefore I thought I'd dig up a ghost story on your campus too. Now, as far as I can tell, there's only one well-documented haunted place on your campus, but that won't keep me from telling your ghost story all the same. As the story goes, at Texas Christian University, Waits Hall has its fair share of ghost stories, but one legend lingers more than the rest, the tale of a mysterious piano player. According to students, late at night, long after everyone has gone to bed, soft piano music drifts through the halls. It isn't annoying, out of tune, or plunking, it's beautiful, although also eerie, and just a little too perfect. At first, students assumed that someone was sneaking into the practice room, but every time someone went to check, the music would stop, just silence and an empty dark room. The old piano sat there, untouched, no one coming in, no one going out. Some say it's the ghost of a former student who once lived in Waits Hall, a pianist who practiced obsessively, but never got to perform their big recital. Others think it's just the way the wind moves through the building. Either way, students agree. When you hear the music, it's best not to go looking for the new player. Now, this is an unpopular opinion, but I personally think that it's actually just Max Duggan, sneaking in post-graduation to practice his true passion. Not football, but smacking those keys with his golden hands. But hey, what do I know? I know he'd never admit it in an interview, but I have my suspicions. The USS Lexington started life under a completely different name, the Cabot, or CV-16, but after her predecessor, USS Lexington CV-2, took an unfortunate trip to the bottom of the Pacific during the Battle of Coral Sea, shipyard workers petitioned the Navy to rename CV-16 in honor of the lost carrier. The Navy agreed because, even in wartime, I guess branding matters. Commissioned in February of 1943, the new Lexington wasted no time in making herself a legend. With Captain Felix Stump at the helm, yes, that was his real name, she embarked on a mission to terrorize the Japanese Navy and prove Tokyo Rose wrong every time she falsely announced that the Blue Ghost, the nickname for the Lexington, had been sunk. In World War II, the Lexington would join the Pacific Fleet in mid-1943, and quickly got to work making life miserable for the Axis powers. She played a major role in raiding Japanese-held islands, escorting invasion forces, and launching airstrikes that left smoking wreckage where enemy ships and airfields used to be. Her first major test came during a raid in December of 1943, where she obliterated enemy targets before taking a torpedo hit that knocked out her steering. Now, while this is generally considered a bad thing for a ship, Lexington's crew refused to let a little thing like not being able to steer ruin their day, and they jerry-rigged an emergency steering system, sailing her all the way back to Pearl Harbor for repairs after this. Meanwhile, Japanese propaganda excitedly declared her sunk. Spoiler though, she wasn't. From then on, Lexington became one of the most feared carriers in the Pacific, and she racked up an impressive count during the Marianas Campaign, including helping to turn the Battle of the Philippine Sea into the infamous Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, an aerial slaughter so lopsided that Japan effectively ran out of experienced pilots. Lexington's aircraft also played a key role in sinking the super battleship Musashi and carriers like Zuikaku, the very ship responsible for sinking her predecessor. Talk about some poetic payback. Even kamikaze attacks couldn't take her down. One particularly bad day saw a kamikaze plane smash into her island structure, causing fires and casualties, but within 20 minutes her crew had things under control. Her planes kept launching, and she even shot down another kamikaze on its way to a different carrier. Basically, if you were a Japanese pilot looking for an easy target, Lexington was not the ship to mess with. Now, while most World War II carriers took a nice long nap after the war, the USS Lexington was no such craft. She was decommissioned briefly, but then she was reactivated in the 1950s, modernized and reclassified as an attack carrier, or a CVA, then later as an anti-submarine carrier, or a CVS. She played Cold War games in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Pacific, proving that even after World War II, she was still a force to be reckoned with. But her longest and most interesting role came when she was sent to Pensacola, Florida in 1962 as the Navy's primary training carrier, or CVT as I said. For nearly 30 years, she served as the proving grounds for thousands of naval aviators, basically becoming the floating equivalent to a very intense driving school. Generations of pilots got their first terrifying experience of landing on a moving target thanks to her flight deck. Finally, after an unprecedented 48 years of service, longer than any other Essex-class carrier, Lexington was finally decommissioned in 1991. Most old warships get turned into scrap, metal, or artificial reefs, but Lexington had other plans. She was donated to the city of Corpus Christi, Texas, where she was transformed into a museum ship. Today, the USS Lexington Museum, because of this, offers visitors a chance to explore one of the most battle-hardened carriers in history. She's been designated a National Historic Landmark, and despite technically being retired, she's still making headlines, like when she played a Japanese carrier in the movie Pearl Harbor, which, let's all be honest, might have been the best part of the film. Thing got a 24% on Rotten Tomato after all. So in short, the USS Lexington CV-16 wasn't just a warship. She was a survivor, a teacher, and a legend. And Tokyo Rose might have declared her sunk multiple times, but history tells a different story. The Blue Ghost never quit. She never went down, and now she's living out retirement in Texas, greeting visitors who get to walk her deck and learn about a ship that kind of refused to pass away. But history is rarely content to remain in the past, especially aboard a ship with a legacy as storied as this one. For decades, visitors and crew members have reported eerie encounters, whispers in empty corridors, shadowy figures glimpsed in the dim light, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. And today, it is my honor to tell you some of these ghost stories that haunt the decks of the USS Lexington myself. To start, there are of course plenty of security cameras aboard the ship. And one evening, at about 3 a.m., one of the security officers heard running on the camera feed around the hangar bay. He, of course, thought, maybe this is a rat, maybe some sort of bird is stuck aboard. But when he looked at the camera, he saw shadowy human-like shapes running back and forth, many of them, as if there was some sort of wartime memory playing out in front of him. The story goes that this security officer actually quit his job following this sighting. But after this was reported, those that believe the old shadow person legends tend to think this was some sort of memory being witnessed, as I said, likely that of sailors running for cover after a torpedo attack on the ship that during World War II was known to have occurred, impacting the hangar bay nearby where the camera was showing, Hangar Bay 3. Future security guards were apparently warned about this sort of thing too, and if you buy the legends, they've experienced this phenomena themselves. There's also a named ghost aboard named Charlie that's seen aboard from time to time. This man is thought to be a sailor that lived aboard the ship during World War II, and he's apparently strikingly handsome, looking very fit with deep blue eyes, and of course wearing a World War II era Navy uniform that even the staff do not have a copy of on hand. Apparently, this individual's apparition is often seen messing around near the ship's engines, where he will, I kid you not, apparently give folks tours and explain to them how the engines functioned. He is also occasionally seen walking downstairs inside of the USS Lexington. Also, in some accounts I've seen, he drags chains across the ship for some unknown purpose, but that's a sound associated with him in modern day, kind of like Jacob Marley chains, if you catch my drift. As for any credence to this legend, I've read a couple of reports that say a man named Charlie actually did pass away aboard the ship in 1944 after a kamikaze attack on it, though I should note, I was not able to find any record of this myself. Not saying it's not true, but records of World War II aren't always easy to stumble upon. Beyond this, of course, there are plenty of other miscellaneous encounters, ranging from sounds of voices, loud crashes and bangs, and even gunfire aboard the ship, where nobody is to be found. There are also frequent sounds of running, and sometimes you can smell the distinct scent of freshly made food where there is, well, clearly no food being prepared. Wait. Let me put on my Seinfeld hat real quick. What's up with bridges with ghosts? I mean, you're crossing a bridge, you look around, and suddenly, bam! A ghost is hanging out by the toll booth. What's the deal with that? Who's paying the toll to these ghosts? Are they getting the ghost money? Is there a ghost economy now? Sorry, I had to. There are just so many ghosts on bridges. Screaming Bridge rests at the end of a trail at Arlington's River Legacy Park. It's a sort of decrepit concrete bridge that's covered in graffiti, and it was actually made to replace an old wooden bridge that, well, the reason it's got in the first place is the exact reason we have this legend. From my sleuthing, it appears this story is authentic. And the story goes that in 1961, a handful of boys, or sometimes it's speculated possibly hobos, decided to, or happened to, set fire to an old wooden bridge, right where this modern-day bridge is. And thus, where this bridge now stands, there was an empty chasm with nothing connecting the two sides of the ravine. Now, it's actually said that someone caught this chasm before anything bad happened, and warning signs and barriers were erected to prevent anyone from driving over the bridge. But at some point, someone else, I guess some other vandals, took these barriers away. Whoever this was is a mystery. Others say these barriers were maliciously removed, exposing the chasm ahead of them. Given, this was a road, I think you see where this is going. Here, it's said that 6 teenage girls were driving in a car down this road late at night, trying to get home from a movie and expecting to drive onto a bridge. Instead, of course, they drove right into the ravine below. 3 of them would pass away from this, and thus the story began. Now, the haunting associated with this is simple, but now in modern day, because of this event, it's said that if you stand on the bridge, perhaps looking over the edge into the ravine below, you might hear whimpers, and these whimpers will evolve into screams. And sometimes these are screams of pain, other times screams for help. Regardless, the story of this bridge is a simple but effective ghost story. That some people crashed into this ravine, and their spirits linger down below the bridge, and will continue to do so for all eternity. That's the whole story, folks. There's not much else to it. If you ever find yourself near northwest Jacksonville, Texas, you might come across the Killough Monument, a spot that marks one of the bloodiest and final Native American attacks on white settlers in East Texas. And no, this isn't just another spooky roadside marker. This is the site of the Killough Massacre of 1838, where things went terribly wrong for a group of settlers who had unknowingly walked straight into a powder keg of tension. Now, this all started in 1837, when the Killough family rolled into Texas from Alabama, eager to start fresh on what they thought was open land. The problem, though, that land had been promised to the Cherokee just a year earlier under a treaty. Unfortunately for everyone involved, the Republic of Texas Senate decided that treaty wasn't worth honoring, nullifying it in late 1837, and they started selling off parcels of land to settlers, including the Killoughs. This did not go over well with the Cherokee, who understandably were not thrilled about losing the land they had already agreed to settle on. Add in a little extra political chaos, some lingering bitterness from pro-Mexican factions still upset about Texas's independence, and tensions were at an all-time high. Sensing trouble, the Killough family briefly fled, but were told they could return to harvest their crops as long as they left afterwards. Seems pretty reasonable, right? Well, that's wrong. On October 5th of 1838, a group of Cherokee who had not been part of this peace deal launched a surprise attack on the settlement. 18 settlers, including Isaac Killough Sr., were put down or abducted. Among the victims were 2 17-year-old girls and multiple children who were taken into the woods, never to be seen again. A few survivors, including a mother carrying her infant son and a small dog that miraculously had the good sense not to bark, hid in the brush for 3 days before making it to safety at Fort Lacey. Word of the massacre spread fast, and a militia led by General Thomas J. Rusk retaliated, hunting down the attackers at an old Kickapoo village near Frankston. 11 people were put down in the skirmish, but the larger conflict was far from over. The massacre fueled even greater hostilities, leading to the Cherokee War the following year. Today, the site where all of this occurred is marked by a stone obelisk erected in the 1930s and a historical marker added in 1965. But don't let the quiet fenced-in memorial fool you. Places like this never truly stay silent. After all, when people vanish into the woods never to return, you have to wonder, did they ever actually really leave? Well, if you believe some of the ghost stories associated with this monument in modern day, I think the answer is no. Now, from what I can tell, there is no real consistent haunting here. That is to say, there's nobody named that haunts this place. Nobody knows if the individuals that do haunt this spot after hours are some of the Alabama transplants or the Native Americans that possibly fell during this attack as well. That being said, regardless of who it is, things here are tense, especially at night. Visitors to this site at night have posted their experiences online and have reportedly heard screams coming from the woods beyond the tree line. They've also heard crunching from leaves in the woods, following them like they're being stalked. Others have even reported peering into the darkness in the distance as they stand at the monument, only to see a troop of native soldiers silently staring at them, glaring angrily. Finally, photos galore have been posted across the internet of everything from dust floating around to insects flying near folks' camera. But no, seriously, there are some interesting photos, one of note being what looks like a cloud of smoke in the darkness just beyond the monument viewing area's boundaries. Not to be brash, but I should acknowledge there are lots of non-ghostly things that can cause smoke, or a cloud. But hey, I just thought I'd take off my tinfoil hat for a second. Regardless, this spot sounds creepy to me, and if you're in the area, while I'm not sure you're allowed here at night, I can almost guarantee it'll be a treat to visit during the day. What you choose to do after the day is none of my business. If hospitals could talk, the old Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas would have a lot to say, and most of it would probably be whispered in a hushed, ghostly tone. I should note, this hospital was founded in 1894, and Parkland spent over a century treating Dallas residents. But the reason we're talking about it today isn't necessarily for its long history. It's a hospital after all. You know folks have passed away here, and I'm sure some of them are spooky ghosts. We're here to talk about the Parkland Hospital, though, because history would remember it for a single afternoon in November of 1963. On November 22nd of 1963, the day started like any other day at Parkland. The staff was busy with their usual rounds when suddenly chaos erupted at 12:38 p.m. Well, you probably know what happened. Of all people, President John F. Kennedy himself was rushed into the emergency bay, following his motorcade tearing through the streets of Dallas at breakneck speeds after shots rang out in Dealey Plaza. The scene inside Trauma Room 1 where JFK was brought was grim. A team of doctors, including Dr. Malcolm Perry and Dr. Charles Crenshaw, worked frantically, but the wound to JFK's head was catastrophic. At exactly 1 p.m., he was gone, and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, still wearing her pink suit, refused to leave his side. In one of the most surreal moments in American history, a priest was called to administer last rites, while a battle broke out over where JFK's body should go next. According to Texas law, a victim's body had to undergo an autopsy before being removed from the state, but the Secret Service had other plans, and in what can only be described as a 1960s version of Try and Stop Us, agents muscled the president's casket out of Parkland and onto Air Force One, where Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as the new president. And that should have been the end of Parkland's role in this dark chapter of history, but fate, or perhaps something more similar, had other ideas. Just 2 days later, Parkland found itself in the middle of another historical spectacle. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of taking down JFK, was being transferred from police custody when, in a moment of live television madness, nightclub owner Jack Ruby stepped forward and blasted him in the stomach. Once again, sirens blared as a high-profile victim was rushed through Parkland's emergency doors. Oswald himself was taken to Trauma Room 2, where surgeons spent 90 minutes operating on him trying to save him, but the damage was too great. He was pronounced deceased in Operating Room 5. For a hospital known for saving lives, Parkland wasn't having the best week. Funny enough, fast forward to 1967 and Parkland rounded out this eerie trilogy when Jack Ruby himself landed in the hospital. He'd been suffering from lung cancer, but the official cause of his passing was a pulmonary embolism. In a fittingly ironic twist, he would pass away in the same emergency department where he'd sent Oswald just a few years prior. Now, following these historic passings, the old hospital remained in operation for decades, undergoing various renovations. Trauma Room 1, where JFK had passed away, was remodeled several times, as if the hospital itself was trying to forget what happened there. And by the 1970s, it had been turned into a generic corridor, with only a small plaque marking the site of one of the most pivotal moments in modern history. Also notable is that the medical equipment from that day was, for whatever reason, locked away by the government, presumably gathering dust in some classified warehouse like the final scene of Indiana Jones. Then in 2015, a new Parkland Memorial Hospital was built across the street, boasting state-of-the-art facilities, 862 beds, and most importantly, a fresh start. The old hospital officially closed in 2022, and in 2024 it was finally demolished. The very walls that had seen presidents, criminals, and conspiracy theories come to life were reduced to rubble. That being said, while I can't point you towards this place anymore because it's gone, I can tell you what folks saw when it used to be in operation, and these stories, well, they're downright eerie. Of course, as you'd expect, the most common apparition is JFK himself. And the stories are usually, to be honest, kinda dramatic, and I may as well tell you one of these stories right here. One account I saw online told of a doctor who actually worked at this hospital before it ceased operation. Just before the pandemic engulfed the world, this doctor sat alone in their office at Old Parkland Hospital in Dallas, analyzing ER reports with a growing sense of dread about the growing number of cases he was seeing of this new disease. But amidst this dread he was feeling, he would apparently hear a commanding voice in his office that said, "In the end, all will be well. Don't you fret, but do sound the alarm, ma'am." It was flippin' JFK. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd be downright gleeful to encounter the old president in all his glory, and I'd beg him to say some iconic quotes like, "Do or do not, there is no try for me," right then and there, just like he used to motivate Luke on Dagobah. But regardless, this doctor, while amazed, was also spooked. Parkland, after all, was where JFK had drawn his last breath, and unbeknownst to them, their office sat just steps away from the very room where JFK passed. Regardless, the apparition left them shaken but resolute. Taking the warning to heart, they fired off an urgent email to the hospital leadership, urging action against what they sensed would become a tidal wave of illness. And then this post I'm referencing devolves into some weird stuff about how the rest of the hospital staff knew this doctor had psychic abilities. Hollywood, write this stuff down. I see a script for your next show once the good doctor is off the air. Regardless, there are many tales like this where JFK would show himself to staff and patients alike during trying times. Also, let's be clear, while I should preface I have absolutely no respect for Oswald, I find it hilarious that some say Oswald too haunted the halls of this old hospital. Accounts vary. Usually these reports were subtle hauntings where someone would see Oswald's apparition staring out a window, looking in the direction of the old schoolbook depository where, he did the job from and all that. And other accounts say he can be seen outside of the room where JFK would ultimately be pronounced deceased. Now, as for other activity here, folks generally painted a picture of the old hospital that suggests there was everything from apparitions of non-famous people to poltergeist activity throughout the whole dang place, and that there were certain rooms in the hospital that were known to be more active than others. Now, as for the modern-day hospital, this same genre of haunted stuff seems to remain, but as you might expect, any tales telling of JFK or Oswald's presence is appropriately absent. Regardless, this hospital is young, so in a few decades, you can bet your sweet ditty, Old Man T Storytime, will be walking around covering some new spooky stuff there. If you're ever cruising through southwest Texas and suddenly feel the urge to question your own sanity, take a detour south of San Antonio to Shane Road. Nestled near the historic San Juan Mission, this otherwise unremarkable stretch of railroad tracks has become one of the most famous paranormal hotspots in the country. Why? Because allegedly, ghost children, yes, ghost children, will push your car off the tracks to safety. Call it a tragic haunting, call it the world's eeriest AAA service, but either way, the legend has persisted for decades. As the story goes, sometime in the 1930s or 40s, a school bus of kids, some say orphans, was heading down Shane Road, when fate decided to be cruel. Just as the bus was crossing the railroad tracks, it stalled. A train, its headlamp conveniently burnt out for maximum horror movie effect, came barreling down the tracks and gave the children and their driver no chance to escape. The result was catastrophic. It took everybody. But as for their caretaker, a nun that was driving them, somehow she was unharmed. Now here's where it gets extra spooky. A few weeks later, the nun that was driving the bus returned to the tracks. She was overcome with guilt, and she parked her car in the very same spot and waited for the train to finish what it started. However, as the train approached, her car mysteriously began to move. It rolled itself off the tracks as if tiny invisible hands were pushing it to safety. When she got out to investigate, she found, cue the dramatic music, small handprints on the trunk. The ghosts of her lost students had saved her. Over the years, thousands of visitors have tested this ghostly push. The protocol to test this is simple. You just put your car in neutral near the tracks and take your foot off the pedal. If your car mysteriously starts moving, congratulations. You've either experienced a paranormal event or gravity. I'll leave you to decide which. Also, for liability reasons, don't ever do this. Seriously, railroad tracks are not safe. Just ask Kentucky's Poplick Bridge. For added effect, some people indulge in the tradition by sprinkling baby powder on the rear bumper before they experiment. This, they claim, helps reveal tiny handprints of ghostly helpers after the car is pushed. Many swear by the results, describing perfectly visible footprints, swirls, and palm lines that they insist weren't there before. Of course, skeptics argue that what they're seeing are just the residual oils from their own hands. But where's the fun in that? Clearly, it must be ghosts of babies. Beyond these kids who band together to push cars off of railroad tracks, other tales tell of a ghostly little girl who appears lost and alone, only to vanish once someone stops to help her. One visitor even claimed her parakeet, usually a chirping machine, fell completely silent at the tracks, only to start squawking again the moment they left. Hey, I guess if birds don't trust it, you know something's up. Nothing's as reliable as a parakeet, of course. So anyways, here's what I have to break your heart. I searched high and low for any record of a bus accident happening in this area, and I hate to break your bubble, but there's no historical record of any bus accident happening at these tracks. Not in the 1930s, not in the 1940s, not any time afterwards. The closest real-life tragedy with any similarities happened in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1938, when a bus full of students stalled on train tracks during a blizzard, leading to a devastating crash. Because of this, some suggest San Antonio borrowed Salt Lake City's tragedy and made it its own, but this is the sort of thing that's become pretty muddled over time. Regardless, if you're feeling brave or just need a good ghost story for your next road trip, take a drive down to Shane Road, maybe even bring some baby powder, maybe a toy for the ghost kids, and see for yourself. Just remember, whether spirits, science, or sheer paranoia, whatever happens, happens at your own risk. And absolutely do not ever stop on or near the tracks. Lubbock, Texas is home to rock and roll legend Buddy Holly, about 60,000 graves, and according to local lore, the literal gates of hell. Nestled near the Lubbock Cemetery, just a short trip past Holly's final resting place, lies a historic railroad trestle, ominously dubbed Hell's Gate, because apparently nothing says scenic West Texas quite like a haunted bridge with a demonic nickname. By day, Hell's Gate is an impressive but kind of sketchy old trestle standing over a quiet stream in Dunbar Park. By night, though, it's allegedly a portal between the living and the dead, a hotspot for shadow figures, glowing orbs, and a spectral entity known as the Railman. If you see a lantern swaying in the darkness, don't get curious, because that's probably him, still mad about how he passed away and very interested in finding new victims. The Railman story is pure nightmare fuel. Once a train worker, and let's be real, a terrible person, he met his end in a very ironic way. He was betrayed by his own conductor, dragged under a moving train, and promptly sent to the afterlife. Nowadays, because of this, he's rumored to haunt the trestle, looking for revenge and allegedly more souls to join him. And his preferred method of doing this, making it look like an accident. So if you ever find yourself near Hell's Gate and see a mysterious light, walk the other way, fast. Now, as for what folks actually experience here, usually they aren't thrown from this old bridge or anything, but my experience is just, man, classic ghost fare. A whispered voice here, a ghostly cackle there, some people even report their clothing is tugged on. But gosh darn it, didn't you get the memo? You're in the woods after all, aren't you? Of course some branches are going to tug at your pant leg. Now I should note that this place is gated off, and regardless, you probably shouldn't visit or go on this old trestle. Seriously, people pass away here looking for the old railman all the time, and the city of Lubbock is fully aware of this site's reputation, thus having fenced it off. And let's face it, plummeting from an old railroad bridge is a bad way to test ghost stories. Plus, seriously, how many views do you think us tube-ubers even get for posting a video of a railroad track? Regardless, whether the legends are true and this is a genuine portal to the underworld or just an old train bridge with a spooky backstory, there's one thing for sure: Hell's Gate is a legendary spot where ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and unlucky trespassers all learn the same lesson. Some bridges are better left uncrossed. If you ever find yourself on the south side of Austin and decide to take a detour down Burleson Road into Richard Moya Park, you'll stumble upon an old bridge that looks like it should still be in use, except it's not. While technically connected to the road, this relic has been retired from automobile duty, now serving as a pedestrian curiosity. Beside it, you'll find a plaque attempting to explain its history, and, well, it's kind of a mess. According to this plaque, the bridge is now made of parts salvaged from an older bridge that once spanned the Colorado River in downtown Austin. Those parts were put in storage, eventually hauled out to build this bridge, which was then promptly destroyed by a flood. But lucky for us, someone apparently had enough spare parts lying around to Frankenstein it back together. The result, a bridge that, in its current form, has been standing since 1922. Why exactly this bridge was built here in the first place remains a mystery, though. Now, if you're here for the ghost stories, which I know you all are, you'll be decided to learn that the supposed haunting here isn't even tied to this particular bridge. No, the spooky reputation comes from a different bridge that once stood in this same spot, spanning Onion Creek. That bridge, a toll bridge back in the day, existed briefly until 1886, and according to legend, that's when the ghosts moved in, so to speak. As the story goes, a young man and woman, star-crossed lovers, naturally, lived on opposite sides of Onion Creek. They met by chance in downtown Austin and fell hopelessly in love, but their families disapproved. Not for the usual Montague and Capulet reasons, but because the toll to cross the bridge was too expensive, and their parents weren't about to let them rack up a tab just to make googly eyes at each other. So the couple did what any love-struck teens in a folktale would do. They snuck out at night to meet in secret, often rendezvousing on the bridge when no toll collector was around. One fateful night, the girl's father, or sometimes the story says it's her brother, legends are weird like that, followed her and caught the two together. And here's where things get melodramatic. Instead of, acting like rational people, the young couple, faced with the sheer horror of being grounded, chose to fling themselves off the tall bridge into the creek below. And because Onion Creek isn't exactly a fluffy mattress of salvation, they didn't make it. Now, did this actually happen? Well, let's just say that in all my digging, I found exactly 0 historical mentions of this dramatic leap of love, not even a stray newspaper clipping. But that hasn't stopped people from claiming to see eerie, shadowy figures twirling and dancing on the bridge, only to suddenly dive into the water below, vanishing into thin air. Oh, and kind of unrelated, but one more thing. This bridge is also home to 250,000 bats. Yes, you heard that right, 250,000 bats. Which I'm not saying explains the ghost sightings or anything, but it sure doesn't hurt the overall creepy factor. So, haunted or not, the bridge at Richard Moya Park definitely has a history. Some of it real, some of it allegedly real, and all of it perfect for a late-night ghost hunt, preferably while avoiding bat-related incidents like rabies. Nestled high on a limestone ridge in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, the Devil's Backbone Tavern sits as one of the most picturesque spots in the state, offering a sweeping view of the land below. But beyond the scenic beauty, the history and ghost stories of this iconic location have captivated both locals and visitors for generations. The story of the Devil's Backbone begins millions of years ago, long before the tavern was built, when a powerful earthquake caused the land to split, creating the rugged, jagged ridge known as the Devil's Backbone. This earthquake, which occurred more than 30 million years ago, formed a dramatic divide between the Edwards Plateau to the west and the lower Gulf Coastal Plains to the east. The geological forces that shaped this land set the stage for centuries of history, both peaceful and violent. By the late 1800s, settlers began moving into the area, and the first stone building was erected at the top of a treacherous trail. Initially built as a blacksmith shop and stagecoach stop, it served as a crucial stop for travelers braving the difficult terrain. But it wasn't until the 1930s that the location would become famous for something more than just a place of rest. In the midst of the Prohibition era, when Hays County was dry and no alcohol was legally sold, the Devil's Backbone Tavern was constructed just across the county line from Comal County in 1937. This location allowed thirsty travelers to enjoy a cold beer, and soon the tavern became a beloved spot for locals and visitors alike. The area around the tavern, however, has always been steeped in stories of violence, and the tales of spirits that haunt the land have become intertwined with the history of the region. It was not just settlers who once roamed this land. The history of the Devil's Backbone is marked by conflict, bloodshed, and death. The land saw brutal encounters between Native American tribes and European settlers, as well as the bloody aftermath of the Civil War, where Confederate soldiers and renegades alike left behind their spirits. These stories of violence left an indelible mark on the land, and many believe that the restless souls of those who met violent ends here are still bound to the region today. Thus, the stories of hauntings along the Devil's Backbone are as numerous as the miles of winding road that stretch across the land. One of the most chilling tales is that of a woman seen walking down the road near the tavern, cradling a baby and calling out for her husband. And no, it's not your mom after you've been ignoring her calls for a week. Witnesses claim to hear faint sounds of a baby crying, only to turn around and find nothing but an eerie, empty landscape. Is it the ghost of a mother who lost her child long ago, or perhaps the specter of a woman searching for her husband who might never return? Or maybe, as some skeptics reasonably point out, the cries of various mammals that live in the region that are often mistaken for the cries of a woman. Whatever you believe, there's more where this came from, and these stories are not confined to the road. The Devil's Backbone Tavern itself is rumored to be haunted by spirits of those who once frequented the place. According to regular patrons, the tavern's old stone walls hold more than just memories. They actually literally echo with the laughter and sorrow of those who passed through its doors. Robert Kelly, for instance, a tavern regular, claims to have seen shadowy figures on the nearby ridge, figures that vanish before he could get a look at them. Others speak of strange noises in the tavern, including sounds of footsteps when no one is around, or the feeling of being watched, as if the ghosts of the past have made the tavern their permanent home, lingering in the space where they once found camaraderie and comfort. The history of the land itself is also steeped in immense amounts of tragedy. During the Civil War, Confederate soldiers made their way through the area, and as you'd expect, many of them met a violent end on this very land where the tavern now stands. One night, however, it's said that a local ran into one of these long-departed soldiers. In this story, a ranch foreman was said to have heard the sounds of a horse galloping by his cabin. And of course, this got him pretty curious, as he thought either someone was paying him a visit on horseback or some of his own horses had gotten loose. When he ventured outside, he saw the ghostly apparitions of soldiers wearing Confederate attire riding along the ridge, their horses' hooves loud enough to shake the ground. So, what he saw, could this have been a lingering memory of the bloodshed that took place here? Or were these restless spirits of soldiers doomed to ride the land for eternity? Some also say that the Confederate soldiers are not the only spirits to haunt the Devil's Backbone. Native American spirits also claim their place in the tapestry of ghost stories tied to the land. The tale of Drago, a Native American herdsman, is one such haunting. According to ranchers in the area, Drago can still be seen on occasion, herding cattle along the backbone. This figure appears as a ghostly silhouette, and some say they can hear the soft murmurs of a language long forgotten on the wind as he drifts by. Other accounts describe the wandering spirits of a widow and her child, forever searching for a proper Christian burial for a miner who was killed nearby. And I should note, this spirit of the widow and the child are kind of linked with the story of the child and the baby we heard of earlier. Regardless, this version says these spirits walk the land in search of peace, but they remain restless as the region never granted them the closure they were so desperately seeking. Some of the most unsettling ghost stories of the Devil's Backbone come from those who have ventured into the more remote areas, such as the aptly named Haunted Valley. John Valerial, a man who hiked this eerie stretch of lands with his friends, encountered a wolf spirit during one of his journeys. As the legend goes, this wolf appeared as a spectral figure leaping at John before vanishing into thin air. His friends, who saw nothing of the kind, soon realized that John had been affected by something otherworldly. Upon returning to the ranch, John was struck by a deep chill, and apparently, this is kind of funny to me, he began speaking in a deep, otherworldly voice, recounting stories of Indian massacres and forgotten battles that had taken place in the very spot where they stood. Therefore, his friends said that John was possessed by the spirit of the land, and that a ghostly wolf spirit somehow had taken control of him. Personally, I find this, to be a very fun story, and I'll leave it at that. Regardless, such experiences are not isolated to a single person, and in addition to these strange, notable happenings, there have been many visitors to the Devil's Backbone who go unnamed that have reported less substantial phenomena, such as pictures falling off the walls of the tavern, glasses tipping over inside of it, and also in the tavern having an overwhelming sense of being watched, especially while you take a wee at the urinals. At least in the case of the tavern, maybe less so regarding the land itself, Robin Ludwig, the owner of the tavern, believes that the spirits inhabiting the place are not malicious. They're more like the regular tavern goers who hang out there too long and refuse to leave, except now they offer unsolicited advice on life after death in addition to the best beer pairings at this tavern. So in conclusion, the Devil's Backbone Tavern stands as more than just a picturesque spot in the Texas Hill Country. It's a living testament to the region's rich and often tumultuous history. From the geological origins millions of years ago to its role in the Prohibition era, the tavern has witnessed countless stories of human struggle, resilience, and tragedy. And the ghosts that are said to haunt the land and the tavern itself add an eerie yet fascinating layer to its legacy. Folks, this is the longest video I've ever made, just topping our Ohio's Ghost Stories video. So if you enjoyed it, please give my currently deteriorating voice a bit of love by leaving a comment, liking the video, and even subscribing if you want to see more. Seriously, it would mean a ton for me. Otherwise, as for what's next, man, I'm craving a little bit of gumbo right now, and I think the Big Easy deserves a little bit of love too. That's right, Louisiana, I'm coming for you. After that, geez, who knows where we'll go, but do know I'll be watching for your suggestions in the comments like a hawk. Otherwise, whether you just said hi to a man in a coonskin hat at the Alamo, or if you got bitten in the booty at Kyle Field, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.